Chapter 154. His sharp eyes landed on Gong Yimo. They were gloomy and ambitious. I saw with my own eyes how much the Emperor dotes on you. Moreover, you're such an outstanding person. It's impossible for you to lie low. At that time, I thought that you were my chance. So I approached you and followed you. What's the point of being a 7th-ranked official? I believed that you wouldn't push your own brother into the fire pit. So I followed you to build the canal. I waited for the day when you would strike back. His eyes flashed with a strange light. His voice was dreamy. I didn't expect that I would really succeed. And I didn't have to wait for a few years. I could soar to the sky in one day. Gong Yimo lowered her eyes. She didn't know why, but she didn't really like him. I succeeded, he said in a dreamy tone. Imperial concubine Long did as she said and gave me a high position. I can trample my brother under my feet and let my father see who is worthy of his cultivation and who is. But he smiled bitterly. When he looked at Gong Yimo again, there was no passion in his eyes. There was only bitterness. But the result was different from what I expected. The cold wind swept up the snowflakes and whistled through the air. The two were clearly only 2 or 3 meters apart, but this distance was like a chasm that was difficult to cross. Gong Yimo could only look on coldly. Father ignored me, he said. He was very disappointed in me. He also said that what he was most afraid of was brothers fighting. I didn't expect that in the end, it was still brothers fighting. He smiled bitterly. His face became paler. His Majesty doesn't like me. Clearly, when he first received the news of Lei Feng, he was so enthusiastic. But ever since you faked your death, he always looks at me with a cold gaze. Clearly, I'm also talented. I'm someone who really wants to make a name for myself. The Emperor's attitude determines the attitude of his colleagues. Intentionally or unintentionally, they ostracized me, causing me to gradually be isolated. Many of my former friends have cut ties with me, leaving me completely alone. As for the Crown Prince, he sees me as a thorn in his side. There have been a few times when I couldn't get up. He shook his head. That's not the most important thing. The most important thing is, Ninth Highness, he's really something. He's only been in the capital for a few days, but he's already done everything he can. Today, Imperial concubine Long told me that Gong Dai wants to attack me, but she can't find out why. She said, only by finding you and threatening him can I live. As his last word fell, Gong Yimo only felt that everything was silent. Only the sound of snowflakes falling could be heard, landing on her hair and clothes, making her look so thin. She was so indifferent that Lika wondered what exactly he wanted from her. He wanted to make a name for himself, but was abandoned by his family and friends. He wanted to make a name for himself, but was ostracized by everyone. Now, in order to save his life, he had to rely on the girl in front of him. The life he imagined was not like this. You can't kill me, nor can you catch me. If those people hadn't left before, it might be possible. But now, her only problem was whether she should kill this person in front of her. Lika smiled faintly. He was not bad-looking. His smile was like the blooming of snowflakes, but there was an indescribable sadness. I also don't want to kill you. After saying that, he lifted his clothes and knelt in front of Gong Yimo. His action shocked Gong Yimo. She narrowed her eyes slightly. What are you doing? Lika raised his head. There was no fear in his eyes. Instead, there was a sense of relief. Nothing. I was just thinking that instead of dying in Gong Dai's hands, I'd rather die in your hands. This kind of life, I don't want to live anymore. After saying that, he lowered his head and laughed. Perhaps from the moment I chose to betray you, I was wrong. But I won't admit it. Yes, I'm not wrong. The reason why I'm kneeling here today is because I was wrong by one move. You were my sincere friend at that time. Dying in your hands is not unjust. But what betrayal? If I had to do it again, I would still do it. So, I'm not wrong. The only mistake is, Father didn't know how to judge people clearly and didn't know how to be flexible. The mistake is that the Emperor was biased, leaving me with nothing to show for my talent. The one who's wrong is everyone else. I'm not wrong. After saying that, he suddenly laughed out loud as if he was relieved. After laughing, Pa looked at her coldly and said, Don't worry, but it doesn't matter. Winner takes all, I admit it. After saying that, he used his hand to make a slit on his neck. His eyes were filled with eagerness. Come, use your hidden sword and slit my throat. I hope you can be more ruthless and don't make me feel too much pain. However, the strange thing was that after waiting for a long time, Gong Yimo didn't move. She only looked at him thoughtfully. Do you know the feeling of having your throat slit? Gong Yimo suddenly asked. Li Ku was a little confused and looked straight at her. He looked like he was in a daze, which made Gong Yimo laugh. Then, she touched her neck as if she was recalling something and muttered, after having your throat slit by a sword, if it's deeper, you might die immediately. But if the person using the sword is more ruthless and slit your throat a little shallower, then you will feel suffocated. Then, it will be extremely uncomfortable. It's very painful to wait for your blood to run out and die. Her words were cold, as if she had experienced it before. Lika felt an inexplicable sense of panic, but he forced a smile and looked up at her. So, you want me to bleed to death? Unexpectedly, Gong Yimo blinked and finally laughed and shook her head. You said that you got close to me with a motive, but I believe that later on, you also had a moment of sincerity towards me, Su Yuan, Ziqing and the others. But you betrayed me. Actually, betraying me is not the most serious thing. What I am angry about is that you are full of talent, but you used it all on fighting for power. Even when I knelt down and begged you to keep it a secret, you were blinded by ambition and didn't think about the consequences. This is what you meant by having great ambition? For the country and the people? Isn't that too narrow-minded? Gong Yimo's words were like steel needles. Every word made Li Ke's face turn paler and paler. He knelt on the ground, but he knelt upright. His eyes looked stubbornly at Gong Yimo. What do you know? Do you understand my pain? I am full of passion, full of pride. Yet all of you want me to be an editor whose words carry little weight? That's not the life I want. Only the higher my status, the more people will listen to me and value me. Only then can I do more for the country and the people. So, I climbed up regardless of everything, for the sake of being able to lift heavy weights easily, for the sake of serving the country, for the sake of leaving my name in history. I am not wrong. But so, what if you are sitting in a high position? Aren't you now begging for death because you are being ostracized by others? Chapter 155. Gong Yimo's sarcastic remark made Li Ke's face turn red. I didn't. It's all of you. You didn't give me a way out. Since that's the case, isn't it death? A man is born magnanimous and does not fear death. It's just ahead. Just take it. Then why did you ask me to kill you? Gong Yimo casually exposed his pretense. Looking at his pale face, she smiled coldly. If he did not regret it, he would not be kneeling here and begging for her punishment. Maybe you're not wrong and you don't regret it. Gong Yimo was a little tired. Her soft voice sounded like a sigh. But I've decided to forgive you. You. Li Ke lifted his head to look at her. The muscles on his face were trembling. Was Gong Yimo pitying him? Was she giving him charity? Unexpectedly, when he lifted his head, he met Gong Yimo's cold eyes. That pair of eyes seemed to be able to contain everything, but at the same time, it was also empty, dangerous, and deep. Didn't you say that you'll do better than your brother when you're in a high position? That you'll do more good deeds for the country and the people and leave your name in history? I'll wait. After saying that, she turned to leave. Li Ke came back to his senses and shouted angrily, Gong Yimo, you'll die in my hands one day if you continue to be so soft-hearted. Gong Yimo did not stop. With her back facing him, she waved her hand nonchalantly. Whatever. You'd better think about how to survive first. That tone of hers was really nonchalant. Li Ke clenched his fist tightly. He buried his head deeply. He should have felt humiliated, but he didn't know why. But when Gong Yimo uttered the words, forgive you, he felt his body and mind relax. So, deep in his heart, he had wanted to use death to exchange for her forgiveness. If he had denied himself, then what had he gained after all this time? Hearing the sound of weapons clashing from afar, he suddenly let out a muffled laugh. Finally, he took out a dagger and stabbed it into his body. Before he fainted, He was still thinking that if he died, then in this short life of his, the one thing he would not regret the most would probably be meeting her. Gong Yimo, I have already betrayed my beliefs. As for you, since you have chosen to persevere, then please persevere. All the way west. Originally, Gong Yimo wanted to look for her master, but after thinking about it, she felt that she was just a stranger to him, so it was better not to disturb him. Thus, she wandered aimlessly. A few days later, she arrived at a town, Gua City. This place was still at the foot of the emperor, so the trade was very prosperous. Gong Yimo changed into men's clothes and sat at a small stall to eat. She was not used to being alone. She buried her head in her food, but heard the discussion from the neighboring seats. Have you heard? The 9th prince who made great contributions in the West continent is critically ill. How could that be? I've seen him from afar before. He looks like a spirited young man. Isn't that right? Gong Yimo thought that she had heard wrongly. She hurriedly walked up and grabbed that person to ask, What did you just say? Who are you saying is critically ill? Gong Yimo glared at that person, her eyes sharp and murderous. He was so frightened that his legs turned to jelly. He hurriedly said, Sir, I'm not spouting nonsense. It's true. 9th Prince is vomiting blood nonstop. The imperial physicians are helpless and are looking for famous physicians. Vomiting blood? Gong Yimo loosened her grip, and that person hurriedly ran away. She was still in a daze. Gong Dai vomiting blood. It couldn't be because of her, right? Her little face was pale, and her heart was in turmoil. She hesitated over this thought. What should she do? Should she go back? But if she went back, what if Gong Dai was lying to her? But if she didn't go back, what if it was true? Gong Dai, that was the person she cherished in the palm of her hands. On the other hand, Chi Manor was filled with gloom. Gong Dai was lying on the bed with a pale face. However, there weren't any imperial physicians around. Lo Chi carefully walked in and knelt by the bed as he whispered. The news has already spread, and His Majesty's notice has already been posted in Xiang City. Princess has only left for a few days, so she will definitely see it. As for Gong Dai, he seemed to have fallen asleep. After hearing his words, he didn't move at all. Lo Chi sighed inwardly and continued, Our men have been searching from the 4 city gates, but have yet to find any trace of Princess. After saying that, he originally thought that Gong Dai would be angry. Who knew that he actually closed his eyes and deeply furrowed his brows. It was as if he was having a nightmare. After a while, Gong Dai suddenly groaned in pain and slowly opened his eyes. His eyes were different from the usual black and white coldness. At this moment, his eyes were blurred, as if he was still in a dream and unable to extricate himself. After a while, his gaze slowly turned cold and finally turned into a deathly stillness. Tonight, have everyone leave the manor. Lo Chi raised his head in confusion, but heard Gong Dai continue. Also, have everyone outside return. Why? This time, Lo Chi was really shocked. No one knew better than him how important the princess was to His Highness. Why would His Highness make such a decision? As for Gong Dai, he only slowly placed his hand over his heart and closed his eyes. I can feel it. Royal sister, she has returned. After Gong Yimo sneaked through the city gates, she didn't directly head to Chi Manor. Soon, the sky would turn dark and she would go and investigate when the time came. In the end, she wasn't prepared to meet Gong Dai. She only wanted to see how Gong Dai was doing. If it really was an emergency, she couldn't care about anything else. However, if Gong Dai was lying to her, what should she do? In the tavern, she had downed jug after jug of wine. Everyone said that wine boosts courage. She never thought that there would be a day when she would have to use wine to boost her courage. Night quickly arrived. Gong Yimo secretly approached Chi Manor and stopped to listen. During the day, she had heard that Chi Manor had sent out all of its men and that it was now an empty manor. She didn't believe it, but after listening, she really felt that it was very quiet, as if there wasn't a single person inside. This made Gong Yimo a little angry. Even if they were in a hurry to find someone, they shouldn't disregard their own safety like this. Recently, there had been quite a number of people spying on the manor. She shook her head disapprovingly. then flipped over the wall and landed steadily on the grass. At this moment, there was still a layer of frost on the grass. When she stepped on it, there was a light, crisp sound. Gong Yimo held her breath and waited for a long time. When she found that there was indeed no one, she hurriedly ran towards Gong Dai's residence. The manor was really quiet. The ambush that she had thought would happen was completely gone. Gong Yimo's heart trembled. Could it be that something had really happened to Gong Dai? With this thought, she ran even more hurriedly. Chapter 156. When she walked to Gong Dai's door, she still felt that it was a little unreal. Yesterday, she was still thinking that it would be best if they could meet again after a few years. Today, she ran back eagerly. When her hand touched the carved wooden door, she could barely hear any sound from inside. Gong Dai, was he still inside? If he was inside and sick, why wasn't there anyone guarding the door? If he wasn't inside, where did he go? The door was gently opened. To prevent the cold wind from blowing in, she quickly closed the door. Her heart was pounding. There was only a dim yellow light in the room, blurring her vision for a moment. Seeing that there was no one in the living room, she suppressed her breathing and walked into the room. The faint smell of medicine lifted her spirits, and she quickly walked to the bedside. The moment she saw Gong Dai, Gong Yimo covered her mouth with one hand to suppress the sound that was about to come out. Gongju. His ink-black hair was spread out on the snow-white couch. His delicate eyebrows and eyes were tightly closed. Under his straight nose, his lips were bloodless. His whole person seemed to have lost his spirit. It was as if he was a porcelain doll lying there. Standing so close to him, Gong Yimo couldn't hear a trace of his breath. She was a little anxious and took a few steps forward. Gong Dai. Gong Yimo's heart trembled. She stretched out her hand, but she didn't dare to touch him. Gong Dai? Gong Dai? She gently sat beside Gong Dai, as if she was afraid of disturbing him. Seeing him like this, Gong Yimo understood that he was really vomiting blood. Because she had experienced it before, it was as if her spirit had been sucked out in an instant, and she was as good as dead. The only difference was that time, she was so angry that she vomited blood, but Gong Dai, it was because of her. Gong Yimo felt very guilty and regretted her action of leaving. She finally reached out to touch his brows and sighed. This pair of eyes looks better when they are open. When she closed her eyes, she was beautiful, but she was so fragile that it made one's heart ache. Who knew that as soon as her voice fell, Gong Dai's hand would grab her and he would open his eyes. That pair of black, jade-like eyes looked deeply into her eyes, as if he wanted to completely imprint her in the depths of his mind. If I open my eyes, will you still leave? His voice was hoarse as if he hadn't spoken for a long time. Under the dim light, he pursed his lips and stared at her, waiting for her answer. Gong Yimo opened her mouth, but before she could say anything, she was pulled into Gong Dai's embrace. Royal sister, stay by my side. Gong Yimo's chin rested on Gong Dai's shoulder. She could feel his body trembling slightly because of the tension. That kind of eagerness and joy, mixed with sorrow, she could actually feel it all. She was a little flustered. The young man's body seemed to have recovered and was getting hotter and hotter. She was also being hugged tighter and tighter. If possible, I really want to fuse you into a part of me, never to be separated again. His low sigh woke Gong Yimo up from her dream. She gently pushed Gong Dai, but he didn't move at all. Afraid of hurting and agitating him, Gong Yimo tried her best to ask in the softest voice possible, "You really like me?" Perhaps she would run away, but when it came to facing it, she wasn't one to shrink back. If there was, since it was already in front of her, then she would say it clearly. Gong Dai's response was only a passionate kiss. He trembled slightly and pressed his lips against her neck. His extremely hot breath blew over, making Gong Yimo feel half of her body go numb. She didn't dare to move in his embrace. Her heart was also beating very fast. Feeling her nervousness, Gong Dai smiled deeply and whispered into her ear, "Since I was 9 years old, I have fallen in love with you, my royal sister." His words shocked Gong Yimo. Then, her scalp went numb and she was stunned on the spot. For a moment, she didn't know what to do. Gong Dai didn't care. He was hugging her like this and whispering sweet nothings into her ear. This was something he didn't even dare to think about before. At this moment, he suddenly felt a little lucky. He was lucky that Gong Yimo had finally discovered his feelings. Now, he didn't have to hide anymore. He could show it all without any scruples. With that thought, he hugged Gong Yimo even tighter and breathed in her scent as if he was breathing in oxygen. Gong Yimo didn't know what to say anymore. 9 years old? Would a 9-year-old child know what love was? So, she wasn't wrong. Gong Dai's feelings for her were just attachment and gratitude. He had misunderstood this feeling and caused it to go down the wrong path, resulting in this scene. She opened her mouth and wanted to say that it was wrong of him to do this. However, Gong Dai was so weak right now that she didn't know what to say. Her long silence made Gong Dai a little uneasy. He tried to lick Gong Yimo's earlobe, but found that she didn't resist. That kind of happiness was simply unreal. Royal sister. He sighed softly. I know it's hard for you to accept, but it's okay. I can wait. As long as you're within my reach, I can always wait for you. He closed his eyes and gently rubbed her hair. His cold eyes were filled with love and sweetness. If you feel that it's difficult, I can endure it. I can still be your brother, your family. As long as I'm the most important person to you, I can live with any identity. I can also become whatever you like. Anything is fine. He was such a noble young man, yet he could compromise to such an extent. It was really unbearable to hurt him. Gong Yimo couldn't help but think, in her previous life, was he also so deeply in love with Su Miaolon? Later on, he personally sent Su Miaolon to Gong Chei's bed. She didn't know what kind of heartache he went through. Perhaps, Gong Dai had always been a person who knew how to fulfill someone's wish. He was cold to others, but to those who were good to him, he was unbelievably gentle. Moreover, to be able to give up so much, he had already far surpassed her in her previous life. However, she was destined to let him down. Gong Yimo couldn't imagine that she would fall in love with someone younger than her. Moreover, this person was raised by her. She watched him grow up from his thin and weak appearance. This kinship was the most precious thing to her. She didn't want this relationship to become complicated, so she calmed her heart and said in a low voice, "You're my brother." Her words made Gong Dai's body suddenly stiffen, but she still continued. "You're also the most important person to me. In this life, I won't get married, nor will I fall in love, nor will I talk about this kind of relationship. If you're willing to take back the idea of liking me, I'll never leave you." Gong Dai suddenly and slowly let go of her, looking straight into her eyes. The gentleness and happiness disappeared in an instant. At this moment, he looked at her with a heavy gaze, which actually made Gong Yimo feel a chill run down her spine. Be your brother for life? Chapter 157. No emotion could be heard from his low voice, but his heart was being torn apart. He tried his best to control himself, telling himself to calm down. What she meant was that he had to let go of this relationship. Not only that, he would never be able to hug her or kiss her openly for the rest of his life. What she meant was that he was the most important person to her in this life. She would never leave him, but that was where she was for the rest of her life. He would never be her lover. Gong Dai's hands relaxed and tightened. Even Gong Yimo could feel his forbearance, but she did not dare to say anything. She was waiting for his answer. His rationality told him to say yes. Wasn't it just holding back his feelings? Wasn't it just pretending that he did not love her? So many years had passed. He could do it. She would never marry and accompany him for the rest of her life. Wasn't that enough? But his feelings were screaming. They were screaming. They were rolling and wanting to tear everything apart. He was unwilling. He did not want to be the person closest to her. He wanted more. He wanted her to love him. He wanted her to kiss him. He wanted to be her real man. He longed for it so much that his heart was breaking. He had already endured so many nights of tossing and turning. Was he going to continue enduring? How long was he going to endure? Gong Ju's eyes alternated between forbearance and fear. She couldn't imagine how terrible Gong Ju's thoughts were at this moment. If she knew, she would have fled immediately. After a long time, just when Gong Yimo thought that he would not answer, Gong Dai laughed. It was a bitter laugh. His voice was heavy, as if he could not breathe. Okay, I promise you. Gong Yimo blinked. Including letting go of this relationship? Her words were like a steel knife, stabbing him so hard that his heart was bleeding. However, he still wanted to smile. He smiled as he spoke slowly, one word at a time. Yes, including letting go of this relationship. Letting go? No, he would never let go. Even if the world was destroyed, even if the world could not tolerate him, he would die. He would never let go. Gong Dai felt that his smiling face was almost stiff, but his heart was numb from the pain. Otherwise, how could he say these words so calmly? However, Gong Yimo was still worried. She hesitated and asked, "Then we'll still be siblings in the future?" A fishy and sweet taste filled his mouth, but Gong Dai resisted it with all his might. He laughed again. "Yeah, we'll still be siblings in the future." These few words were like death by 1,000 cuts, but he still said it so casually. He never lied to her, so Gong Yimo was satisfied. Originally, she wanted to give him a hug to reach a consensus, but when she thought that it was a sensitive time, she gave up. In addition, she began a deep self-reflection. In the past, she always felt that she was young and others were young, so there were many things that she did not care about. Now that she was 14, although in her opinion, this was still the age to act coquettishly, she forgot that in another year, she would be considered an adult in the ancient times. She would be a big girl. It would be better to have less physical contact in the future. Therefore, she retracted her outstretched hand and pretended to stretch. She forced herself to be normal and asked in a lazy manner, "Then, do you feel better now?" Psychological problems needed to be treated. As long as she could talk it through and slowly recuperate, she should be fine. Gong Dai smiled palely. His black hair set off his devilish facial features. Under the dim and flickering candlelight, there was a dangerous kind of beauty. "I'm much better." Hearing him say this, Gong Yimo nodded worriedly. "Have a good rest. In the future, I won't be so rash anymore. I'll tell you wherever I go." "I'm sorry." Gong Dai suddenly reached out and touched Gong Yimo's hair when she was unprepared. "It's okay. It was just that." He would never let her have the chance to leave his side again. Never again. "Oh right. Why aren't Lo Chi and the rest with you?" Gong Yimo had wanted to ask this question for a long time. If they weren't around, what would happen if someone came at night? Gong Dai said, "I asked them to look for you. They'll be back tomorrow." "If I didn't send them away, why would you come back so obediently?" Gong Yimo showed a disapproving look. "Then how can you guarantee your safety tonight?" Gong Ju smiled, then suddenly leaned over and snuggled up to her legs, sighing faintly. He sighed and said, "My safety can only depend on Royal Sister." His action shocked Gong Yimo. She quickly backed away and almost tripped Gong Dai. Gong Dai slowly straightened his body and sat on the bed. He said in a self-deprecating tone, "Why? As your younger brother, I can't even touch you?" His gaze was too scary. The feeling that sent chills down one's spine appeared again. Gong Yimo's heart was pounding. She forced herself to calm down and then forced a smile. "No, I just suddenly remembered that if I have to watch over you tonight, I have to bring my blanket over. I can recognize the bed, but you didn't seem to be in low spirits after leaving for a few days." Gong Dai didn't expose her. Gong Yimo secretly heaved a sigh of relief and ran out of the room. After she left, a stream of blood slowly flowed out from the corner of Gong Dai's mouth. He reached out to wipe it, but the more he wiped, the more blood there was. Looking at the blood-stained bedsheet, he smiled. However, his heart felt like it was being cut by a blunt instrument. Every inch it went in, it was doubly painful. He didn't want to experience this kind of pain anymore. A thought formed in his mind. He secretly circulated his chi. Since he was already injured internally, the moment he circulated his chi, he spat out a mouthful of blood. His face was as white as a sheet. When Gong Yimo came in with the blanket and saw the blood-stained bed, she couldn't care about anything else. "Gong Dai." She flew forward and held his hand that was hanging down. Their fingers interlocked, and her inner energy was freely transferred into his body. After a long time, Gong Dai's face looked a little better. It wasn't like before, when it was full of death. Gong Yimo finally smiled. At this time, she saw that Gong Dai had finally recovered. Her heart that was pounding because of fear also gradually calmed down. Tomorrow, she would invite the best doctor to treat Gong Dai's body. With this thought, she was extremely tired. She didn't care about the blood-stained bed and the unconscious Gong Dai. She directly lay down beside him and fell asleep. In her sleep, she felt Gong Dai's body temperature was cold. She even subconsciously hugged him so that he could feel the warmth. Just like that, the night passed. The next day, when Gong Yimo woke up, the sky was already bright. She opened her eyes in a daze. She thought of something and hurriedly looked at Gong Dai's condition. Who knew that when she turned around, she would bump into Gong Dai's arms, which made her slightly stunned. But while she was still in a daze, Gong Ju lowered his head and gently kissed her on the lips, gently whispering to her, "Good morning, Momo." Chapter 158. Gong Yimo was stunned. The youth lying beside her with his chest exposed was Gong Dai, right? But why did he kiss her? Furthermore, why did he call her Imo? Gong Yimo's brain crashed. Did he forget what he said last night? Just as she was about to get up, she realized that her body had become very soft. This feeling was very similar to the exhaustion of inner strength, but it was more like poison. Gong Yimo's eyes immediately turned sharp as she looked at Gong Dai in disbelief. "You, what did you do to me?" Gong Dai was wearing a white robe as he lay beside her and played with her hair. Even the bedsheets had been changed at some point in time. The white and black contrasted with his pair of black jade eyes which had a soul-stirring beauty. As if he didn't find it seductive enough, he smiled faintly. "It's just a temporary cultivation dispersing pill. In 7 days, Royal Sister's inner strength will be restored." His words were gentle, but the meaning behind them caused Gong Yimo's eyes to widen. She thought of something and couldn't help but shrink back. Behind her was the wall, and she couldn't even escape. Gong Dai saw her retreat and narrowed his eyes slightly, allowing her hair to fall from his hand. Finally, he revealed a tolerant smile. Imo, where do you think you're going?" Gong Yimo looked at him in horror. Being called so intimately by a youth who was younger than her, and whom she had watched grow up made her scalp tingle. "Gong Dai, I'm your elder sister, not Imo." Her slightly cold attitude made Gong Dai a little unhappy. He moved closer to her, and in the narrow bed, she was forced into a corner. Gong Dai saw that her body was becoming more and more tense and said with some amusement, "Your royal sister, but you're also my Imo, Gong Dai." Her sudden stern attitude made Gong Dai's smile gradually fade. Gong Yimo was a little angry. "Why did you feed me the cultivation dispersing pill? Why did you kiss me? Have you forgotten what you said last night?" Gong Dai raised his eyebrows slightly. "What did I say last night?" His rhetorical question made Gong Yimo so angry that her face turned red. "You said that you would let go of this relationship that the world couldn't tolerate. You also said that you wanted to be my brother for the rest of our lives." Her words made Gong Dai's expression suddenly turn cold, as if a storm was brewing in his eyes. He was only a teenager, but for some reason, he made Gong Yimo feel pressured. He suddenly moved closer to Gong Yimo. As he moved closer, the layers of cold air made the hairs on her body stand up. "Then I'll answer you again." As he spoke, he placed one hand on the wall behind her, trapping her in his embrace. A dangerous feeling lingered in this space. "You want me to put you down?" He chuckled in a low voice. "What should I do? I can't do it. Whenever I see you close to other men, I'm so jealous that I want to go crazy. Whenever I see you, I can't control myself. If you want me to put you down, I'll have to die." He spoke faster and faster. As for brother and sister, Gong Dai lowered his head and looked deeply at her. His expression was firm and passionate. "If you care about blood relations, it's fine. We cannot have children. I can take contraceptive drugs. I won't let you get hurt. We can be together." This thought made him suddenly smile, and his eyes lit up. "Yes, that's right, royal sister. No, Momo, I don't want to be your brother. I can also be your man. How dare you?" Seeing that he was so happy that he suddenly suppressed the urge to kiss her, Gong Yimo could no longer maintain her calm and shouted loudly to stop him. Gong Dai was stunned by her shout, but she was trembling slightly under his body. What exactly went wrong? Gong Dai was a person who respected his loved ones the most. In her previous life, she could tell that he was with Su Miaolon. Even if he liked her, he wouldn't force her. So what was going on now? Gong Yimo couldn't understand. She looked at him in panic and murmured, "It shouldn't be like this, Gong Dai. I know you. You look cold, but your heart is soft. You definitely won't hurt me, right?" She could only gamble. She believed that in her previous life, Gong Dai could fulfill Su Miaolon's wish. In this life, he definitely wouldn't force her. When Gong Dai heard this, his body sank bit by bit. In the end, Gong Yimo could clearly feel his passion and forbearance. "But I have no other choice. I can only get you and become your man first. Then, you'll have to have me, right?" Gong Dai's eyes were slightly dazed. It was as if he was imagining the sweet scene when she had to have him. Finally, he couldn't help but lower his head and lightly plant a kiss on her forehead. The corner of his mouth slightly raised, filled with love and happiness. Gong Yimo's last line of defense in her heart collapsed the moment he kissed her. She gently bit her lower lip. You can't do this to me." As she spoke, she used her hand to push Gong Dai. However, this action only caused the loosely tied inner garment on his body to slip even more. He didn't move an inch. His smooth and powerful shoulders and exquisite collarbone combined to form an alluring picture. His eyes were smiling as he looked at her. That face of his seemed to be glowing, which made his already enchanting appearance make one's heart skip a beat when he smiled. Gong Yimo's brain could no longer function, but she also knew that this couldn't go on. She slightly swallowed her saliva. Before Gong Dai lowered his head and kissed her lips again, she closed her eyes and screamed, "You can't do this to me, because I already have someone I like." Her words indeed made Gong Dai stop. However, in the next moment, she felt that the surrounding air seemed to have solidified. It made her unable to breathe. Before she could react to what was happening, her chin was tightly gripped by Gong Dai. He forced her to look into those extremely terrifying eyes. This one look made Gong Yimo's heart skip a beat. "Who is it?" These two words seemed to have been squeezed out from the gaps between his teeth. He stared at Gong Yimo. That pair of black, jade-like eyes were quickly filled with blood vessels. From this, it could be seen that he was suppressing a lot of anger to say those two words. Gong Yimo was hurt by his grip, being so close to his anger, that gaze that was almost burning her, and that almost tangible coldness mixed together to form a monstrous wave. This small space seemed to be about to be destroyed, which made her shocked and scared. Gong Yimo grabbed the bedsheets below her and looked at him in fear. This feeling, compared to her previous life when Gong Dai broke her fingers one by one, made her even more scared. It shouldn't be like this. Gong Yimo had long lost her ability to think. Clearly, in her previous life, he liked Su Miaolon, but was willing to fulfill her wish. Why couldn't it happen to her? Gong Yimo forced herself to calm down. She believed that Gong Dai wouldn't change, so she took a gamble. She said each word clearly. "I already have someone I like. If you really like me, you have to respect me." Chapter 159. Before she could finish her sentence, she heard a loud noise. The four legs of the bed they were on suddenly broke. The entire bed sank, causing her to cry out in alarm. But this was not the end. Gong Dai forcefully lifted her chin. Gong Yimo could feel the murderous desire in his body. That murderous intent was so strong that it made his inner strength uncontrollable, causing his black hair to flutter without any wind. "What did you say?" He said those words in a hoarse and deep voice, giving her one last chance to take back those ridiculous words. However, the more Gong Yimo was forced, the more she retorted. At this time, although her face was pale with fear, she stubbornly repeated the words she had just said. "I said that you love me, so you should fulfill my wish." Bang, bang, bang. Gong Yimo subconsciously hugged her head and shrunk back. She saw an invisible inner strength surge in the room. Gong Dai actually broke through at this moment, reaching the 5th level of wind and nature. Inner strength materialized. Debris filled the room. The people outside heard the noise and did not dare to run in to take a look. Even Lo Chi, who was standing at the door, could feel the murderous intent in the room. Gong Yimo closed her eyes and coughed softly. If she could open her eyes now, then she would understand what it meant to be faced with imminent disaster. The bone-piercing chill seemed to have materialized. Gong Yimo closed her eyes, but she felt her entire body tremble. She could not help but squint to look at Gong Dai. In the dust, he looked down from above, his eyes cold and ruthless. Even more crazy, those eyes matched with his demonic face. It was extremely beautiful, but it was so dangerous that it made people suffocate. He pulled out a smile, but that smile made Gong Yimo want to retreat. You said that you like someone else, but you want me to fulfill your wish? Gong Yimo did not speak, only stubbornly looking at him. Gong Dai covered his mouth and smiled. What was strange was that this somewhat feminine action was so stunning when he did it, making people unable to take their eyes off him. Come, royal sister, tell me, who was it that caught your eye when I wasn't around? Gong Che? Shun Shiyi? Or Startling Cloud? Or is it Su Yuan or Yu Ziqing? His voice was cold and emotionless, but it made people feel evil for no reason. Every time he called out a name, Gong Yimo's heart would jump. Just when she didn't know how to answer, he smiled strangely. Tell me what you like about him. I'll dig out my eyes and give them to you. I'll chop off my hands and give them to you. If it's my whole body, a dim light flashed in his eyes. If it's a whole person, then I'll have to drag it out and feed it to the dogs. After all, you and I are going to sleep together, and there can't be too big of a gift in between. His words were said slowly, but it made Gong Yimo more and more flustered. In a daze, she seemed to see the cold and murderous regent from her previous life. When he was torturing her, he was like this. The more afraid she was, the happier he was. She had obviously worked so hard, but she didn't expect that he would still become the person that made her afraid. As for wanting me to fulfill your wish, Gong Dai felt that this was like a joke, so he couldn't help but laugh. His laughter echoed in this small space, cold and bloodthirsty. It made Gong Yimo's heart sink even more. After laughing, Gong Dai lowered his head and kissed her cheek, not allowing her to refuse. His mouth used the most gentle tone to say the cruelest words. If you want me to fulfill your wish, in your next life. His words shattered Gong Yimo's last hope. She didn't understand why she and Su Miaolon were in different situations even though they were in the same situation. If Gong Dai knew what she was thinking, he would definitely tell her that it was because Su Miaolon couldn't even compare to a single strand of her hair. His fair fingers slowly lifted Gong Yimo's clothes, waking her up from her dream. What are you doing? She tried to retreat, but found that there was no way to retreat. Gong Dai sat on top of her, tilted his head and looked at her with a slight smile. I want to check and see if Royal Sister has given something that belongs to me to someone else when I'm not around. He would do what he said. This knowledge made Gong Yimo tremble with fear. She hurriedly hugged her chest and said, No, I'm lying to you. I don't like anyone, and I've never been approached by anyone. Gong Dai laughed. I hate it when Royal Sister lies to me, so I want to punish you. Gong Yimo really had no other choice. She didn't even have the strength to truss a chicken at this moment. She was quick-witted and lifted her sleeves in front of him. On her arm, there was a small dot of chastity sand, bright and glistening. This was given to her by Empress Shui when she was born. Look carefully. I didn't lie to you. Her voice sounded like she was about to cry. She was scared and complained in a hoarse voice. How can you do this? I didn't lie to you. Gong Dai seemed to be distracted by that of chastity sand. Seeing her about to cry, Gong Dai seemed to be slightly shocked. Under this shock, all the hostility in his body dissipated. Finally, he revealed a trace of helplessness. He naturally knew that Gong Yimo was lying to him. Although he was far away in the western region, he knew her every move clearly. But when he heard that Gong Yimo used the excuse of having someone she liked to reject him, he couldn't help but go crazy. But when he saw the faint bruise on Gong Yimo's chin, He hated himself for being so rash. He didn't want to hurt her. He just couldn't help it. Even though he knew that Gong Yimo was lying to him, he still couldn't help it. Gong Yimo waited for a long time for Gong Dai's reaction. When she opened her eyes, she saw that Gong Dai was biting his lower lip lightly as he looked at that of Chastity, Sand with a desolate expression. It was as if she made him unable to get what he wanted, and made him helpless. In this way, he turned back into an obedient little brother, and not the regent who wanted to take her by force. Just when Gong Yimo didn't know what to do, Gong Dai lowered his head and gently kissed that of Chastity Sand. Between his eyebrows, there was once again coldness and gentleness. There would be a day when he would personally erase this color from her fair arm. But now, she was so resistant, he sighed. Royal sister, don't lie like that again. I'm afraid that I really can't help it. He looked at Gong Yimo absent-mindedly. At this moment, she was in a sorry state, but because of the entanglement just now, it was hard to hide her desire. His Adam's apple moved. He closed his eyes and said in a low voice, I'm afraid that I can't help but force you. After saying that, he felt a little hurt. Don't think of leaving me. I don't want you to hate me. After saying these threatening words, he gathered his lapels and got off the bed. The room was already in a mess. He looked around, picked up a piece of clothing from a pile of broken wood, put it on, and walked out. Only when he closed the door did Gong Yimo let out a long sigh of relief. She had escaped a disaster. When she came back to her senses, she realized that her whole body was covered in cold sweat. Looking at the broken wood in the room, she couldn't help but stare blankly. Gong Dai really liked her. Chapter 160. A new set of clothes was quickly delivered to her, but she did not even glance at it. Her mind was still in a daze, and she did not know where she was. The Gong Dai from earlier was too frightening. Perhaps that was the real him and all his previous obedience was just a disguise. Gong Yimo gently bit her lower lip as she hugged her knees and curled herself into a ball. Why did he like her? She was about to go crazy from this realization. How could it be like this? First it was Gong Che, and now it was Gong Dai. She was a little afraid, and in the depths of her heart, she once again had the thought of leaving. After her rebirth, the tension from her previous life had made her unable to consider anything too complicated in this life. If she encountered a problem, she would solve it. If she could not solve it, she would put it aside for a period of time. Perhaps it would get better on its own. As for the matter with Gong Dai, she could not solve it. Should she put it aside? Gong Dai was only 13 years old and was at the age when he was ignorant about relationships. It was also the time when it was easiest to change targets. As long as she disappeared for a period of time and Gong Dai married someone else, this relationship would be treated as a young and inexperienced matter and would be forgotten. But she glanced at her current state. Because she had taken the medicine, not only had she lost her inner strength, she also felt that her limbs were weak. In this situation, how could she escape from Chi Manor? Moreover, if she left like this, would it worsen the situation? For the first time in her life, Gong Yimo, who did not like to think about the consequences, began to seriously consider this possibility. If only she could turn back time, she would definitely be a good parent while she was raising Gong Dai. By the time Gong Yimo had finished thinking and changed her clothes, it was already afternoon. The moment she stepped out, she bumped into Exian, who had been waiting for a long time. Seeing her come out, she smiled and brought over a cup of milk. Princess, you must be hungry. Drink some milk to fill your stomach. The food is still warm, and they are all your favorites. The cup of milk was still steaming hot. It was wrapped in a silver-beaded quilt and brought to Gong Yimo. She stared at the milk in a daze, then looked at the smiling Exian, and asked in bewilderment, You already knew? Gong Dai likes me? She didn't know why, but when she said the word like, she actually felt a little shy. Exian, smiled and slowly retracted her hand. Her breath was like frost, and when she smiled, 2 dimples appeared. Isn't it natural for His Highness to like the princess? Exian, Gong Yimo slightly frowned. She thought that Exian was timid and calm, but she didn't think that she would help Gong Dai hide it from her. You know that's not what I'm talking about. Unexpectedly, Exian had a serious expression. This servant knows what the princess means. His Highness loves the princess. This servant has known for a long, long time. She said it lightly, but Gong Yimo's eyes widened. Probably when His Highness was 9 years old. At that time, when the princess was sleeping, His Highness would think of ways to sleep with the princess. He would also intentionally or unintentionally touch the princess's face. Several times, this servant saw His Highness looking at the sleeping you with extreme longing. But at that time, His Highness was still young and didn't dare to do anything. As she spoke, she seemed to think that the blow wasn't enough. She blinked and said, "Everyone in the residence knows that His Highness has loved you for a long time. So, she was the last to know?" This blow made Gong Yimo become muddle-headed again. She unconsciously followed Xian to the dining hall. The room was heated. As soon as she entered, the hot air made Gong Yimo's spirit rise. She was just about to take off her thick fur coat, but she felt Gong Dai's scorching gaze. Her back stiffened, and her hands stopped moving. Seeing her like this, Gong Dai didn't get angry. At this time, he was wearing a dark black robe with silver edges. His hair had probably just finished bathing and was only dried and draped over his shoulders. His handsome jade face was hazy white, but his eyes were clear and distinct. With such a smile, it was hard for anyone not to be moved. Gong Yimo's heart also jumped a few times. It wasn't because of admiration, but because of this impactful beauty. She suddenly remembered that in front of her, Gong Ju was always handsome, clean, and tall. Gong Yimo had never seen him sloppy. He always deliberately showed his most beautiful side in front of her. This boy's desire to court her was something she only discovered now. Gong Ju's feelings for her were always exposed. "Royal sister, come, sit down." There were only 4 dishes and 1 soup on the round table. Gong Yimo didn't like to waste, so the quantity was small. Although it was small, it was exquisite. The color, smell, and taste were all good. It made people's mouths twitch. There were only 2 seats at the table. Gong Dai sat on one, and the other was close to Gong Dai. This made Gong Yimo hesitate, but she was really hungry, so she didn't care about anything else. She walked to his side and sat down. Gong Dai was happy. He turned his head and ordered the people in the room, "All of you, leave."
Yes.
Gong Yimo heard this and wanted to refuse. But when she thought that these people were with Gong Dai, it was useless to stay. But if there was someone, maybe Gong Dai would restrain himself a little? She wasn't that afraid. But Gong Dai, was he a person who would restrain himself? Gong Yimo hated being at a loss like this. She frowned in annoyance. But now she didn't have the strength. She could only use her wits. "It's so hot. Let me help you take it off." Sure enough, Gong Dai couldn't wait the moment he saw her. They had only been apart for a short while, but he missed her so much. He couldn't help but want to be close to her. Gong Dai used a tone and strength that couldn't help but refuse. He smiled and undid the hidden button on her chest. In an instant, the fur coat fell to the ground, revealing her slender body. She was wearing clothes, but when his gaze swept over her, it felt like something had scraped against her body. It made her have the illusion that she wasn't wearing any clothes. She trembled slightly. The depths of Gong Ju's eyes once again burned with passion, but he held it in. He turned around and put a piece of shrimp tofu on her plate. "They're all your favorite. Eat them while they're hot." The young man's voice was still cold and pleasant. Gong Yimo didn't know where the awkwardness came from. She lowered her head and muttered, "I don't like to eat these anymore." She carefully looked at his expression with her big eyes. She tested him step by step to see how far Gong Dai could hold it in. Who knew that Gong Dai's expression didn't change? "Royal sister, what do you want to eat?" Now that he was rich, he could satisfy all her material needs. Gong Yimo thought for a moment and said, "I want to eat chocolate, fruit mousse, macarons, and ice cream." Her words finally made Gong Dai's expression stiffen. He was like this not because of Gong Yimo's request, but because he suddenly remembered that Gong Yimo wasn't an ordinary person. She had unknown things in her hands. Sometimes, he even wondered if Gong Yimo was a fairy from the heavens. When the time was up, would she go back? This thought made his expression turn ugly. He thought to himself that he had to take her as soon as possible. She couldn't leave him. Chapter 161. His gloomy gaze fell on Gong Yimo's slightly aggrieved face, and he felt pity for her. Royal Sister had not eaten yet, so there was no need to rush. If Royal Sister knows how to make it, feel free to tell me. As long as it's something that can be made in this world, I'll definitely let you eat it. As he spoke, he picked up another piece of fish and placed it on her plate. He said softly, "Now, let's eat this first, okay?" His coaxing tone gave Gong Yimo more courage. She deliberately snorted in dissatisfaction. "I don't want to eat this kind of thing. I'm not eating it." Seeing her throwing a tantrum, Gong Dai couldn't help but sigh. "How can you not eat it? If you don't eat it, how can I eat you? If you're hungry for too long, your body won't be able to take it." Gong Yimo didn't dare to look at him. Finally, she turned her head and said softly, "If you don't give me the antidote, I'll go on a hunger strike." This time, it was as if she had touched the young man's reverse scale, causing his eyes to narrow dangerously. The effect of the cultivation dispersing pill only lasted for a week, but she was so eager to take it. Was it because she had already decided to leave him? No, he wouldn't allow it. "Royal Sister, if you don't eat your meal obediently, I'll have to use force." Gong Yimo straightened her neck and glared at him. "I won't eat it. I'll go on a hunger strike. What can you do to me?" She didn't believe that Gong Dai would dare to hit her. Unexpectedly, Gong Ju only chuckled, and his eyes lit up. Gong Yimo stared at him in a daze. He picked up a piece of tofu and put it in his mouth. Suddenly, he reached out and held the back of Gong Yimo's head and directly fed it to her lips. Their lips and teeth instantly intertwined, and his voice became hoarse. "If you don't eat it, I can only feed you like this." This sentence made Gong Yimo's eyes widen. While she was shocked and embarrassed, her heart was boiling with anger. Gong Dai, why did he dare to do this? But after all, she wasn't someone who would throw an egg at a rock. She gritted her teeth and hurriedly picked up her chopsticks, venting her anger. It's good to eat more. Later, she would take a good look at the things in her space. She must escape. Seeing that Gong Yimo was so docile, Gong Ju felt a little regretful. He licked his lips and looked at Gong Yimo's angry little face. His heart itched and gave birth to a trace of longing. He couldn't wait any longer. Today, he was going to completely possess her. No matter how independent she was, no matter how strong she couldn't go against the entire secular tradition. To get her, he got her. That was, no matter how. She was. To him too. As for whether they were blood relatives or not, he had long forgotten about it. He could have Gong Yimo change her identity. If she couldn't stay in the capital, she could go to the fief and live with him for the rest of her life. To look. To not to look to be to look to be to look. To look. Too. But he sighed in his heart. "Royal Sister. She doesn't like me at all?" He looked at his hands. He was handsome and capable. He was confident that he would become more outstanding. He would surpass all the men in the world. Plus, he could spend time with Royal Sister. Why did she have no feelings for him when he loved her so much? Royal Sister. What kind of man does she like? He believed that as long as she told him, he would become the man she liked. He would do even better than that. But when he thought about it, he felt that he was getting greedier. Once, as long as she was with him, he would be satisfied. Later, he was satisfied when he could have some physical contact with her to quench his thirst. But later, he felt that if he could be more intimate with her and kiss her more often, he would be satisfied. But now, he had done it. He actually hoped that she would love him back. Perhaps, he would never be satisfied with the person he loved. While he was in a daze, Gong Yimo put down the bowl and said in a muffled voice, "I'm done eating." Unexpectedly, her words were like an order. The desire that was brewing in Gong Dai's eyes quickly surged. She was done eating. He was still hungry. Moreover, he had been hungry for a long time. Gong Yimo's heart skipped a beat when she saw his expression. She suddenly regretted coming out. Why did she come out? She could have asked someone to send the food to the room, but the room made her feel even more uneasy. She shifted her body a few times, hoping to get further away from Gong Dai. She couldn't beat him in a fight, but she couldn't bear to hurt him. Gong Yimo was frustrated. She decided to reason with him again. Gong Dai. Hmm. The young man's deep voice was tantalizing. Gong Yimo didn't know why she was blushing. She gritted her teeth. Do you know that it's wrong to go against human relations? Now, she could only use this to refute him. Gong Dai was in a daze for a moment. Then he said, I know. Damn, why did you do that when you knew? Gong Yimo felt depressed. She said, we grew up together. You should know how important you are to me. This sentence made Gong Dai slightly happy. He felt satisfied when he thought about how Gong Yimo had rushed back when she heard that he was sick. If this care was out of love, it would be even better. Gong Yimo was still trying to persuade him. I know that you lost your mother when you were young. You don't have anyone by your side. I'm the only one who takes care of you. So it's understandable that you have such thoughts about me. Gong Dai looked at her with a pair of sparkling eyes. Did she understand his feelings? Unexpectedly, Gong Yimo changed the topic. But this admiration of yours isn't love. It might be a mixture of kinship and gratitude, as well as feelings for a woman. So, I think you've misunderstood. This isn't pure love. It's more of a curiosity. Because you don't have any other female characters by your side, you fell in love with me. Gong Yimo felt that her analysis made sense. However, she didn't see Gong Dai's eyes dim. After a long time, just as Gong Yimo was holding her breath and waiting for his reply, he sighed softly. He looked at her in pain and helplessness. I thought that the hardest thing would be for you to accept my feelings. He shook his head and smiled bitterly, but I didn't expect that it would be so difficult for you to believe in my feelings. His expression was so sorrowful. He seemed to be extremely humble, but he didn't expect that he could be even more humble. For no reason. It made Gong Yimo's heart ache. Apart from you, I've never been curious about any other woman. Apart from you, I won't tolerate it again and again. Even if I'm about to go crazy, I just want to get a kiss from you. I can't sleep at night because you're the one I think about day and night. I want to become stronger because of you. If you give me an affirmation, I can be happy for a long time. If you're dissatisfied, I don't know what to do. If this isn't love, then tell me, what is? Chapter 162. His words made Gong Yimo's heart sink to the bottom. Even if she didn't want to admit it, she had to admit that this young man, whom she had personally raised and treated as her family, had really fallen in love with her. However, this feeling didn't bring her any joy, only a heavy burden. She didn't understand. She just couldn't understand. After all, in the modern era, the marriage of cousins would be discussed for a long time, not to mention the love between children of a reorganized family. Even if they weren't related by blood, the strange feeling was better than being cousins. No, she had to leave. Otherwise, if she stayed, it would only make Gong Dai sink deeper and deeper. Was she going to start a relationship with Gong Dai? Her silence made Gong Dai sigh even more. He reached out and gently held Gong Yimo's hand, sighing, It's okay. Even if you can't accept it now, you will accept me one day. However, this wait was on the premise that he had her first. When she was sober, he would definitely not be able to bear it. Gong Dai even thought about drugging her. At this moment, Lo Chi invited him in. After entering, he didn't even dare to look at Gong Yimo, only whispering something in Gong Dai's ear. Gong Dai's gaze turned cold, and he looked at Gong Yimo worriedly. Pretending to be sick was a temporary measure. Now that he was in a position that could be easily touched, he couldn't keep being sick. Moreover, someone had told the emperor that royal sister was still alive, so he had to go and explain. I have to go to the palace in the afternoon. As soon as he said that, Gong Yimo's eyes lit up, making him so angry that he couldn't wait to have her right now. In the end, he just sighed faintly. Royal sister, be good at home and wait for me to come back. Gong Yimo nodded her head repeatedly. That obedient look made Gong Dai even more worried. However, there was an emergency in the palace, so he had to go. With another sigh, he leaned over and kissed Gong Yimo's face. With outsiders around, Gong Yimo was caught off guard and blushed. Gong Ju was once again tempted by Gong Ju's appearance. What should he do? He wanted to eat up royal sister every day. Gong Yimo was still unaware of his forbearance. She looked at him with a pair of big eyes, as if urging him to leave quickly. She was really a little vixen. He could always easily break through in front of her. If this continued, he probably wouldn't be able to enter the palace today. Regretfully, he left. Before he left, he ordered Lo Chi to surround Chi Manor so tightly that not even a drop of water could trickle through. Firstly, Gong Yimo seemed to have been exposed, and he had to ensure her safety. Secondly, he was afraid that she would escape. Lo Chi felt that there was still a long way to go. The princess was such an eccentric person that it made him feel like he was facing a great enemy. However, Gong Dai said indifferently, "Find a few servants to guard her. If she really wants to leave, and you can't stop her, kill one person for every step she takes." Will it work? Lo Chi felt that when the princess was ruthless, she could also be quite ruthless. Gong Dai smiled. When it is necessary to kill, Royal Sister is more ruthless than anyone. However, if it is because of a personal dispute that involves the death of others, she will give in. His words were light and casual, but it sent a chill down Luo Chi's spine. He suddenly felt that no matter how powerful the princess was, she would not be a match for His Highness. How could a person who understood you so well, who even knew your thoughts, principles, and bottom line clearly, fight against someone who knew you well? After Gong Dai left, Gong Yimo let out a long sigh of relief. Only God knew what she had gone through today. Her mood was up and down, just like riding a roller coaster. Gong Yimo walked back and forth in the courtyard, digesting her food and thinking at the same time. How on earth could she leave? Space, environment, memory, what could she make use of? Moreover, the last time she left, she met with Imperial concubine Long's people. Since her attack failed, it was hard to guarantee that she wouldn't fly into a rage out of humiliation and use other people to destroy her. So if she stayed here, she would only be Gong Dai's burden. She couldn't help but recall the memories of her previous life. Although many things had deviated from the right track, there were still some that didn't. Suddenly, she thought of something and couldn't help but be shocked. The Emperor's birthday banquet was coming soon. She almost forgot that this was the Emperor's 50th birthday, and there were many people who came to congratulate him. She could only blame herself for being too closed off recently. She didn't even receive such news. Calculating the time, it was already 3 days later. No wonder Gong Dai's health had just improved, and he was called to the Imperial Palace. Now that Gong Dai was in charge of the safety of the Imperial Palace, for such an occasion like the birthday banquet, he really couldn't leave, so it was highly possible that he wouldn't be back for the next few days. This knowledge made Gong Yimo extremely happy. She still had the poison cleansing pill in her space, which might be able to counteract a portion of the effects. Moreover, since Gong Dai wasn't around, she could think of a way to leave. Who knew? Just as she was sleeping soundly that night, Gong Dai, he still came back. It was already late at night, and the winter night was even more desolate. Gong Dai stood in front of Gong Yimo's door and heaved a sigh of relief. She was still here. Only God knew. He had originally wanted to stay in the Imperial Palace, but he used the excuse that he still wasn't feeling well and needed to go back home for a famous doctor to administer acupuncture. Only then was he able to finish his work and rush back. When he was busy, he didn't feel it, but on the way back, he was so afraid and terrified. Afraid that when he came back, he would face an empty room. He softly pushed open the door. Perhaps because she thought that he wouldn't come back, Gong Yimo slept very peacefully. Her little face was flushed red, and without inner energy, her hearing was only slightly better than a normal person. So she didn't even notice that a person had gently laid down beside her. Just how big of a heart did she have? A few days ago, when the Crown Prince confessed to her, she was so terrified that she could calmly resolve it by turning around. But today, he had clearly forced her to stomp her feet several times, but in the end, the moment he left, she was able to sleep soundly without any trace of insomnia. Gong Dai couldn't help but sigh. This was his royal sister. If she could lie down, she would never sit. If she could resolve it, she wouldn't let it pass the night, and if she couldn't resolve it, she would throw it to the back of her mind. It made people love and hate her at the same time. Gong Dai's heart was stuffy, and he lightly bit the tip of her nose. Gong Yimo woke up with a start. Seeing that it was Gong Dai, she was stunned and thought that she was still dreaming. However, The slight chill from his body made Gong Yimo hug her body and glare at him. "What are you doing?" Her appearance made Gong Dai laugh. He hugged her and rubbed against her body like a big cat, lazily saying, "Nothing. I just want to sleep with royal sister." His approach made Gong Yimo unable to treat him with a normal heart. Her whole body tensed up, like a little animal that was about to explode. Why don't you go to your room to sleep?" Gong Dai lifted his head from her embrace and said in a very innocent tone, "My room is ruined. I can only squeeze in with you, royal sister." Chapter 163. Gong Yimo finally shut her mouth and didn't say, "Why don't you go to the guest room?" Instead, she looked at him defensively. However, she saw that Gong Dai really just hugged her and closed his eyes. Gong Yimo heaved a sigh of relief. She knew that he was really tired. How could he not be tired? He had just vomited blood, and his mood was so unstable in the morning. In the afternoon, he had to face the Emperor again. The Emperor didn't seem to be sure that Gong Yimo was in his residence. However, with the Emperor's suspicious character, he would definitely send someone to investigate in the next few days. Then, should he hide Gong Yimo somewhere else? This question made Gong Dai vexed. Moreover, there were quite a number of people eyeing his position. He had only been sick for a few days, and there were already people who couldn't wait to use the Emperor's birthday as an excuse to say that he was unwell and wanted to replace him. However, how could Gong Dai spit out the food that was already in his hands? Therefore, with just a few words, he defeated the other party and took on the task of guarding the residence alone. After dealing with the Emperor, he had to deal with the despicable people. Although he could deal with these despicable people with ease, in terms of ruthlessness, he could be more ruthless. In terms of conspiracies and plots, he could take every possibility into account. Moreover, Gong Dai was rich and knew how to calculate people's hearts. In the future, he would definitely be an opponent that everyone would be afraid of. However, he was only 13 years old and was not as twisted as he was in his previous life. His desire to fight for power was also not as strong. He would persevere and work hard, all for Gong Yimo. Only by becoming stronger, could he protect her and have the right to love her. Therefore, he endured his boredom and impatience and dealt with those people. He was really tired. Gong Yimo saw the deep fatigue in his expression and couldn't help but feel pity. If he hugged her, then so be it. As long as he didn't move, she wouldn't lose a piece of meat. Moreover, if she resisted and forced him, what if he ate her up tonight? Thinking that she had to face this kind of problem at such a young age, Gong Yimo was speechless. Although it was early in her previous life, she only got married at the age of 18. Seeing that Gong Yimo did not resist, Gong Dai was satisfied. He hugged Gong Yimo and slept soundly, as if he owned the whole world. Just as Gong Yimo gradually lowered her guard and prepared to continue sleeping, Gong Dai slowly opened his eyes. Looking at the sleeping face close to him, his heart was abnormally peaceful. He only hoped that time could stop here. That would be the greatest happiness. The next morning, when Gong Yimo woke up, Gong Dai had already left. Before he left, he carefully tucked her in without making a sound, letting her sleep until dawn. Gong Yimo sighed. She accepted her fate and got up. She flipped her palm and several types of pills appeared in her hand. She now had medicines to stop bleeding, rejuvenate, and detoxify, but none of them could cure him. On the other hand, there were a few types of pills that she had brought from the other world that she could try. Suppressing the internal force could be said to suppress the qi and blood. Then, would the blood and qi promoting medicine in her space be effective if she ate it with the detoxification pill? Thinking of doing it, Gong Yimo gritted her teeth and swallowed the two types of pills. After eating lunch, Gong Yimo was pleasantly surprised. It was actually effective. Although she had only recovered 1/10 of her strength, at this speed, she would be able to fully recover in 1 or 2 days. This knowledge made her heart burn with passion, and her chances of escaping increased by a few notches. Afraid that she would be bored, or perhaps to monitor her, Exian had been by her side. Gong Yimo thought for a while, and suddenly said, "After being in the house for so long, I don't know what's going on outside. Exian, tell me, what interesting news have you heard recently?" Exiner thought for a while and said, "If you want to talk about interesting things, other than His Majesty's birthday, it would probably be the Crown Prince's upcoming wedding." She seemed to have the intention to tell Gong Yimo something, so she said it in detail. The Crown Prince probably really likes that Miss Su, so he personally asked for the imperial decree to grant the marriage. Moreover, after the new year, the Crown Prince will be going to Huai River, so the wedding date is set to 1 month later. When Gong Yimo heard this, she sighed slightly. She didn't know what Gong Che was thinking, although she wasn't a person who would go down a dead end. But one day he said that he loved her, and the next day he personally appointed another person to be his concubine. This person was even her opponent in her previous life. Thinking about it, it was quite disgusting. It was just that she couldn't control another person's life, so she let it go. Is there anything else? Seeing Gong Yimo's lack of interest, Exiner said again, "There's nothing else. It's just that the city has been very lively these past few days. Many adult princes and princes who were stationed in their fiefdoms have returned, and they even brought back many rare treasures. Many commoners are watching the show on the streets. I heard that the Elephant King, who was far away in the northwest, even brought back a huge eagle with a golden head to present to His Majesty." The Elephant King, the Emperor's oldest child, who had left for his fiefdom early. Gong Yimo's heart skipped a beat. In her previous life, after the Daiyu state was split into pieces, the Elephant King who occupied the northwest was quite powerful and could be considered the biggest dark horse. In this life, he hadn't made much of a name for himself. He was probably a character who pretended to be a pig to eat the tiger. There's also Nan of Gojoseon, Exiner said. Daiyu state had 3 princes with different surnames: Prince Ping, Jinshi of Gojoseon, and Nan of Gojoseon. However, this Nan of Gojoseon indulged himself in wine and women, and usually, it was hard to think of him. Nan of Gojoseon is in the extreme south, near the small neighboring countries. I heard that this time, he's going to present something very magical to His Majesty. Something very magical? Gong Yimo didn't care. In her previous life, when she came to the capital, the emperor was already 52 years old, so she didn't know what had happened. However, in her previous life, the emperor was very hot-tempered when he was 52 years old. Moreover, he was weak and sickly, and gradually became muddle-headed. In this life, at least until now, he was still a wise ruler. As she thought about it, she suddenly felt that something was amiss. Time flew. In the blink of an eye, tomorrow was the emperor's birthday. Gong Yimo hugged her blanket and thought about her escape plan. Gong Dai had already stayed in the palace for 2 days. Tomorrow was an important day, so he definitely wouldn't come back today. Therefore, she had to think carefully about how to make use of tomorrow's big day. These few days, Chi Manor's nights had been very peaceful. This made Gong Yimo restless. It seemed that she wasn't the only one who would take advantage of Gong Dai's absence tomorrow. Those who were spying on her, if their first attack failed, tomorrow would be the best opportunity to strike. Perhaps, the opportunity for her to escape lay with these people. As she thought about it, she fell asleep in a daze. In the middle of the night, she suddenly felt someone nibbling on her mouth. Only Gong Dai would dare to do this in Chi Manor. Gong Yimo glared at him and pushed him away. This push was very forceful, causing Gong Dai to be slightly stunned. Gong Yimo quickly changed the topic. "You, why are you back?" When he heard this, he loosened his collar. That casual look was pleasing to the eye even when he was the one doing it. "The palace is quiet, so I came back to take a look." He said so. In reality, he missed her too much and was afraid that she would leave. Chapter 164. Ever since he had revealed his true feelings, his desire for her had grown. This desire had accumulated over time, and now that he had found an outlet, even he did not know how to suppress it. He could only seek comfort from her body. Moreover, he had always felt uneasy. That was why he had run back the day before the birthday banquet in order to completely possess her. He was too worried. He felt that only when he had her body would she be more honest. As for him, he had been thirsty for this day for a long time. Seeing that Gong Dai had started to undress without saying anything, Gong Yimo's heart skipped a beat. No way, Gong Dai couldn't be serious, right? He He was only 13 years old. She did not know that there were people who got married at the age of 13. Moreover, this was their first experience of love. You. What are you doing? Gong Yimo stuttered when she was nervous. She had only just realized that she had this problem. Gong Dai was also very straightforward. He smiled faintly, and the entire room was lit up. However, his smile was stunning and also had a hint of shyness. This made Gong Yimo speechless. I want royal sister to become my woman. Damn, Gong Yimo was stunned. Was he serious? No way, he was just scaring her. No way. You can't force me. I'll be angry. I won't forgive you. Gong Yimo threatened him fiercely. Gong Dai's expression turned lonely for a moment. Then, he moved his fingers and took off his shirt, revealing his well-defined chest. I know. He bit his lower lip and leaned forward. Using his arms, he supported himself above her. Looking at her pale little face, he revealed a hint of pity. I know you'll hate me, but I have no other choice. Only, you can become my woman. As he spoke, he gradually pressed down. His hot breath landed on Gong Yimo's face, causing her to tremble. Gong Dai seemed to have taken a bath. There was a faint fragrance on his body. It was fresh and pleasant, but that was not the main point. She couldn't do this. How could she do such a thing with her beloved brother? Gong Yimo turned her palm and a dagger appeared. She clenched her teeth and stabbed forward, but was stopped by Gong Dai. His expression was indescribable, but the look in his eyes gradually changed and became dangerous. Imo, you should understand. Don't try to anger me. As he spoke, he exerted a little force in his hand, and the dagger fell to the ground with a dull thud. Gong Yimo stared at him with her big eyes. You said you like me. How can you sleep with me without a matchmaker? You clearly don't respect me, so I might as well die in front of you. Seeing her excellent performance, Gong Dai smiled and easily exposed her. My royal sister isn't someone who cares about etiquette, and she won't seek death. He blinked and revealed a touch of tenderness. But you're right. I should have a grander wedding. It's just that I don't dare to let you go now. In the future, I'll definitely give you a grand wedding. Facing a person who was unmoved by force or persuasion, and who understood her very well, Gong Yimo had no other choice but to cry. But she couldn't cry. She secretly pinched herself. She sucked in a breath of cold air and squeezed out a few drops of tears. She looked at him with watery eyes and complained. Gong Dai, don't be like this, okay? I'm scared. Seeing her cry, Gong Dai was helpless. He gently wiped away her tears and sighed. It won't hurt. I heard people say that it will be very happy. Happy my ass. Gong Yimo was really starting to feel sad. What was going on? The brother she took care of wholeheartedly confessed to her, and the child she raised well wanted to eat her up. This change made her extremely uneasy, because in her heart, she didn't believe in love. She didn't believe in it at all. So when kinship turned into love, she was afraid. She was afraid that one day, she would be abandoned and repeat the mistakes of her previous life. Gong Dai, I beg you, if you love me, at least let me fall in love with you. Her words made Gong Dai's heart ache. Why did she not have any romantic feelings for him when he loved her so much? She said that youths were ignorant and longed for the opposite sex. But she was also youthful. Why did her heart feel like it was frozen? Why didn't she have any desire? But grief was one thing. He still couldn't bear to force Gong Yimo. The courage that he had worked so hard to muster disappeared under the attack of her tears. He only hated that he loved her too deeply and couldn't bear to see her sad. When had he, Gong Dai, ever been so careful with others? Seeing that Gong Dai didn't move, Gong Yimo was a little touched. Gong Dai, maybe he was a good person. It was just that in her previous life, the heavy karma, bloodshed, betrayal, and torture made her shrink back from love. She swore in front of Buddha that in this life, she would never love anyone again. Gong Dai actually caught her sudden silence and the fear and despair in the depths of her eyes. His heart felt as if it was pierced by her gaze. Why would someone as carefree as her be afraid of love? Her heart seemed to have a thick wall that rejected all love. He originally thought that it was only for him, but he didn't expect that it was for everyone. What exactly did she go through? Gong Dai didn't understand, but he felt even more disappointed. He hoped that he could participate in all of her, but there were some secrets that she would never tell him. Thinking of this, he finally made up his mind. With a pill in his mouth, he pressed his body down and directly pried open her teeth to feed her. At the end, he didn't forget to linger with her for a while. As their lips touched, Gong Yimo opened her eyes and looked at him blankly. Unlike his obsession and desire, she didn't seem to feel a trace of love. Her eyes were as cold as ice. Gong Dai seemed to be stung by this gaze as he hugged her and lay down. He sighed softly. "I'm sorry. I don't have to force you, but I have to feed you another cultivation-dispersing pill. You're hard to guard against. Just now when you pushed me away, I knew that you've recovered more than half of your power." Gong Yimo didn't say anything for a while. Just when Gong Dai thought that she was so angry that she didn't want to talk to him, Gong Yimo turned over to face him and took him into her embrace. Her sweet fragrance instantly wrapped him up. Her sudden change made Gong Dai feel a little helpless. He didn't understand what was going on, but he didn't dare to move at all, afraid that it was a dream. Gong Yimo patted his back. Her slightly tired voice came from his forehead. "Sleep. I know you're very tired." This sentence actually made Gong Dai's heart tremble, and a sour feeling emerged. Their breaths gradually intertwined. Just when Gong Dai thought that Gong Yimo had fallen asleep, she suddenly said, "Tomorrow, pay more attention to Nan of Gojoseon." Gong Dai raised his head in surprise, but met her eyes that made his heart tremble. Her eyes were smiling and filled with pride. "Have you forgotten what I've taught you? You're knowledgeable and have a photographic memory. As long as you seize the opportunity, you'll be more outstanding than any other man in this world." Gong Dai heard this and suddenly looked at her. His eyes were twinkling like a little deer's. "If I'm so outstanding, why don't you have feelings for me?" Gong Yimo continued to pat his back, but she closed her eyes. Sleep. Even though he still had a lot of questions to ask, her sudden gentleness made Gong Dai not dare to do anything. Even if he was tempted, he didn't want to destroy this short period of harmony. He even wondered if he had taken the first step and succeeded in moving her a little. If that was the case, he was really happy. With this kind of happiness, he quickly fell asleep. The two of them hugged each other to sleep, just like when they were young. Chapter 165. The next day, people from all directions came to congratulate. In addition to the princes and princes, the vassal states also came with gifts, not to mention the other 3 states. They all came to the capital early in the morning. The long line of people made many people stop to watch, wanting to see what was going on. The palace was lively, and the people were celebrating. Gong Yimo could hear the sounds of gongs and drums in the streets even when she was in the room. She was waiting for night to come. Gong Ju's face was cold as he stood not far from the emperor. As far as the eye could see, there were luxurious clothes and pearls everywhere. The entire hall was bustling with noise and excitement. The sound of people drinking, singing, and dancing, and the clanging of bracelets mixed together. Under the influence of alcohol and beauty, the atmosphere was gradually rising. Everyone's eyes were blurred and hidden. In such an occasion, no one would really get drunk. Just as Gong Dai was getting impatient, Crown Prince Che pushed away the others with a smile and walked toward him. "Why doesn't Ninth Brother drink?" Gong Dai looked at Gong Che, who was smiling warmly in front of him, and said lightly, "I have an important task. I don't dare to drink." When Gong Che heard this, he laughed exaggeratedly. His pair of gentle jade-like eyes fell on Gong Ju's body, but there was a sudden flash of coldness in his eyes. It was as if there was an icy blade hidden within, and he couldn't wait to pierce through Gong Ju. "This kind of small matter, I will do it for you. Ninth Brother is a prince. Why do you have to do it yourself?" As he said this, he took a sip of wine from the cup in his hand, with a trace of indulgence and decadence. Gong Dai narrowed his eyes and looked at him, unmoved. Now, Gong Che's voice in the court was getting louder. A few days ago, the emperor issued an imperial edict, making the Liu family in the south the emperor's close officials. This made the Liu family the emperor's spokesperson in the south, the emperor's eyes and hands. Using the benefits of the canal, they helped the emperor to connect the north and the south, and consolidated the imperial power. Therefore, the Lu family suddenly became very popular. In addition, Gong Che was going to marry the beloved daughter of Duke Xinghua as the crown princess. For a moment, he was in the limelight. Seeing that Gong Dai was ignoring him, Gong Che smiled, but his expression was a little lonely. He walked forward, but the moment they passed, Gong Dai heard his cold and mocking voice. "Tell Immerse that I'll be waiting for her to attend the wedding in 20 days. After saying that, he left without looking back. Gong Dai's expression was unreadable. He felt that the crown prince's actions were rather strange. He did not understand what the crown prince wanted to do, but this was also good. The royal sister must be very happy to see him get married. A strange smile appeared on his face. At this moment, the music gradually faded. Seeing this, everyone returned to their seats. Changshi came forward with a big smile on his face and a golden book in his hand. Gong Ju thought to himself, "It's time to announce the gift." As expected, the first to be read were the envoys of the 3 major countries. The first to step forward was the general of Yuqi. However, this general looked like a fair-skinned young man. Gong Dai had heard that he was the person who climbed into the bed of the Empress Dowager of Yuqi. Gong Dai was secretly wary of him. The royal sister had said that in this world, people with courage, looks, ability, and shamelessness were very scary. The man in the light blue robe and silver crown took a step forward. There were many people following behind him, and each of them had a coachman protecting a congratulatory gift. These gifts were covered in red silk, and they looked to be of different sizes. There were many of them. The man bowed and smiled very pleasantly. Foreign official Shang Mingxi is here on the orders of the Yuqi royal family to present a gift to His Majesty of Daiyu State. I wish His Majesty a long and happy life. Present the gift list. Present the gift list, the eunuch announced loudly. Someone quickly handed the gift list to Changshi. He opened it and began to read the gift list. As the names of the exquisite treasures were read out one by one, the people behind Shang Mingxi also revealed the gifts one by one. In an instant, the room was filled with the light of the treasures. Most of these gifts were from Yuqi and Daiyu State did not. Therefore, they were especially precious. The emperor smiled and also gave a very precious gift in return. He showed the style of a major country. "Send my regards to your country's Empress Dowager." Of course, Gongqing knew who was in charge of Yuqi at this time. However, to say that a woman was in charge in such an occasion would not look good on Yuqi's people. It was another kind of pressure. However, Shang Mingxi did not seem to feel awkward at all. He bowed naturally and graciously. "Thank you, Your Majesty, for your gift. This official will definitely pass on Your Majesty's words." After Yuqi, it was Yuheng. Yuheng also presented a generous gift. However, Gong Dai noticed that the leader would occasionally glance at an ordinary attendant behind him. He could not help but be a little more attentive. However, when it was Lu Ye's turn, it was a little strange. After all, they had almost started a war before. However, it was easily resolved by a brat from Daiyu State. This unparalleled feat allowed Gong Dai to have 50,000 imperial soldiers under his command. Their status was revered. It could be said that they were second only to one person and above everyone else. However, all of this was based on Lu Ye's heavy losses. Lu Ye's people could not wait to eat his flesh. The leader was a bearded man. His fierce gaze swept across the room, making the atmosphere a little awkward. The people around him whispered at the right time. This time, his gaze was directly locked onto Gong Dai. The two of them stared at each other across the large banquet hall. They did not give in at all. The emperor's expression also became serious. He did not want to fight, but he was also not afraid of fighting. Lu Ye's people had always been ambitious. They had long seen the richness of the mainland and had been eyeing it for a long time. Who knew what kind of tricks they were going to play today? As the list of gifts was presented, everyone was surprised to find that the number of gifts they presented was not small at all. Emperor Gong pondered for a moment and decided to return an even more generous gift. However, he did not expect the bearded leader to wave his hand and reject his reward. "Your Majesty of Daiyu State, we present a birthday gift for 2 reasons. First, to congratulate you. Second, to ask for a special gift in return." The emperor raised his eyebrows slightly. He was a little unhappy with the man's straightforwardness. "Oh, what do you want?" The man smiled and pointed at Gong Dai. The ninth prince of Daiyu State has 3 life tablets in his hands. Without the life tablets, their souls will not be able to rest in peace. Therefore, I would like to ask your majesty to reward me with the life tablets and return them to their rightful owners. He was still sober and did not make any excessive requests. He only wanted the life tablets. Those life tablets could be said to be Liu Ye's disgrace. They would clearly remember how a great battle was easily resolved by a brat from the other side. Therefore, those people had long been reduced to ashes. Asking for the life tablets back was just a fight for the last bit of face. The emperor did not hesitate and returned the life tablets. In his heart, he thought even more highly of Gong Dai. He was just a brat, but he had done so many things quietly. He had greatly humiliated Liu Yi. It was really satisfying. However, he remembered that someone had said that Gong Dai was harboring Gong Yimo. He did not know if it was true or false. The ceremony was still going on. The following gifts were also very amazing, making people exclaim from time to time. When Nan of Gojoseon presented her gift, Gong Dai slightly focused. Due to his blind confidence in Gong Yimo, he believed that everything she said was reasonable. Chapter 166. Nan of Gojoseon was a person who ate, drank, whored, and gambled. He was in his 40s, but he looked like he was in his 50s or 60s. His eyes were swollen, and it was obvious that he was not a good person. The emperor did not have a good impression of this person who relied on his ancestors to muddle along and wait for death, so he did not care much about his gifts. Who would have thought that after he presented a pile of ordinary gifts, he did not withdraw? Instead, he held a small box in his hand and presented it with a flattering face. "Your Majesty, I still have a treasure here. I'm sure you'll like it." The emperor waved his hand. Changshi was about to take it, but Nan of Gojoseon refused and said, "This treasure, ordinary people don't know how to use it. Would you like me to demonstrate it to you?" Everyone's curiosity was piqued, and they stared at this place without blinking. The emperor slightly raised his eyebrows, thinking that a waste like him could not do anything, so he was allowed to go forward. Nan of Gojoseon dragged his weak body forward step by step, and Gong Dai could not help but get closer. Then, he opened the box 2 meters away from the emperor. A strange fragrance came out. The emperor looked and found that there was some black paste inside, but he did not know what it was for. At this time, Nan of Gojoseon took a tubular object made of pure gold and filled it with the paste. After lighting it, he handed it to the emperor with a tired smile. "Your Majesty, this thing is called Yunyan. It's a special product of a small country outside the border. Take a breath, and your fatigue will disappear. It's the most suitable for your Majesty. Would you like to try it?" The emperor naturally would not use this kind of thing of unknown origin, but the strange fragrance floating in the air made him a little intoxicated. He even had the idea of giving it a try. But when he was about to reach out, another hand took it first. The emperor looked, and it turned out to be Gong Dai. He looked open and honest, and smiled generously. "Father Emperor, listening to Imperial Uncle's magical words, this son is a little curious. Father Emperor, you don't mind this son to try it first, right?" The emperor's outstretched hand paused. He knew that Gong Dai was trying to protect him. He was moved. He had so many sons, but he was the first to rush out. His filial piety was commendable, so he smiled and agreed. Nan of Gojoseon glanced at Gong Dai gloomily. "This thing has a strong after effect and is suitable for adults. Your Highness is still young, so it's better not to try it." Gong Dai raised his eyebrows and said, "Enough stamina? Why didn't you say so earlier?" Feeling the emperor's sudden gloomy gaze, Nan of Gojoseon was so scared that his face turned pale. He didn't dare to speak again. Gong Dai only took a shallow breath, but he realized that this feeling was really similar to the poppy cream that the royal sister had unintentionally mentioned when he was young. The royal sister had said that this stuff already existed, but it wasn't circulated to the mainland. Furthermore, the purification technology was limited. Long-term consumption would deteriorate a person's body and cause them to become addicted. Gong Dai's eyes slightly narrowed. Looking at the dazed gazes on the table, he knew that this was a wonderful opportunity. The emperor stared at him without blinking, but he heard Gong Dai say with a smile, "Imperial Father, this thing does have a refreshing effect, but I've already used the only opium pipe. If your majesty is interested, I'll ask Imperial Uncle to make you another one later." The emperor smiled and waved his hand, indicating for the banquet to continue. Night quickly fell. Gong Yimo sat cross-legged. Feeling the internal energy in her body gradually recovering, her heart finally felt a little more at ease. Suddenly, a few soft sounds came from the roof. When she opened her eyes, she heard the sound of close combat. Lo Chi ran in. Seeing that Gong Yimo was still there, he breathed a sigh of relief. "Princess, please follow me. There's an enemy attack." Gong Yimo obediently followed him. After walking out of the door, she saw that there were a few more corpses on the ground. The sounds of killing gradually died down. Looking up, she saw a bright moon hanging high in the sky. The first wave of people who had launched a sneak attack were all dead. Before Lo Chi could breathe a sigh of relief, someone hurriedly reported, "Not good. There are people trying to break in through the front and back doors." Luo Chi's face suddenly turned ugly. Were those people colluding with each other? If it was just someone trying to break in, then it would be fine. However, he looked at Gong Yimo, who was quietly standing beside him. She was the most dangerous person. However, Gong Yimo, who was being stared at by him, looked in the direction of the imperial palace with some worry. The bigger the commotion in Qi Manor, the more it proved that those people were fearless. There was only one reason for their fearlessness, and that was that something had happened in the imperial palace. Therefore, Gong Dai couldn't rush back. "Is what you said true?" The banquet had just ended. The emperor looked at Gong Dai and said word by word. Gong Dai lowered his head. "Every word is true. This thing can improve one's spirit at first, but as time passes, one's body will deteriorate day by day. One will also become addicted to it and be manipulated by others." While the emperor was muttering to himself, Gong Dai continued, "Nan of Gojoseon definitely doesn't have the brains and courage to come up with such an idea. There must be someone behind him directing him. During today's banquet, this son's actions must have alerted them. Therefore, this son requests an imperial decree to arrest Nan of Gojoseon as soon as possible to prevent him from escaping." He spoke so coldly that even Gong Cheng admired his decisiveness a little. Thinking of something, the emperor couldn't help but ask, "Then, you took a breath today. Will there be any problems?" Gong Dai paused, then said, "There's no problem." He spoke resolutely and decisively, but the emperor thought that he was afraid that he would worry. For a moment, the emperor was moved and allowed him to plead for leniency, quickly arresting the culprit and bringing him to justice. Gong Dai accepted the order and quickly led his men out. However, he didn't expect that by the time he arrived at the relay station, Nan of Gojoseon had already escaped. He sneered and ordered his men to chase after him, while he himself led a group of men to Qi Manor. He had also thought of what Gong Yimo had thought of. He wouldn't fall for those people's trick of luring the tiger away from the mountain. The royal sister was his most important existence. Qi Manor had really fallen into a bitter battle. Apart from those who came to capture Gong Yimo, there were also those who came to kill her. Even though Gong Dai had left many hidden guards behind, it was difficult for two fists to fight against four hands. Lo Chi and the others were gradually unable to hold on. Gong Yimo's heart ached for those dead guards. She wanted to leave, but now she had been completely exposed. She could hide once, but she couldn't hide a second time. This time, if she was captured and the emperor couldn't find her, he would only vent his anger on Gong Dai. Therefore, she couldn't stay here any longer. She had to leave. Finally, when the number of enemies increased, Lo Chi could no longer care about protecting her. He locked her in a room and joined the battle. However, he never expected that Gong Yimo would have recovered her inner strength. The small room naturally couldn't contain her, and she immediately escaped. In order to prevent more casualties in Qi Manor, the first thing she did after she escaped was to blast a wall with her explosives. The rumbling sound of the explosion was too representative, causing many of the people who were fighting to stop. "Not good. She's escaped." Everyone knew that only Gong Yimo had such destructive explosives. Therefore, the earth-shattering explosion was like a signal. Although the enemies came from different camps, they retreated like the tide and chased after the explosion. Even the people from Qi Manor ran in that direction when they realized that Gong Yimo had disappeared. When Gong Dai heard the sound, his heart trembled. Not good. Royal sister is in danger. Chapter 168. But now, reality told her that she was wrong, because she had never considered anyone else. She thought that in this life, she would be the only one to walk down this path. But she did not expect that there was someone who was trying so hard to walk down this path with her. That person wanted to capture her, protect her, and be entangled with her life. So, unknowingly, she had also become entangled? Had she inadvertently caused a disaster to befall her? Why was this happening? Gong Yimo could not figure it out. She did not want to love anyone. She did not want that. She had had enough of the pain of giving up everything for her lover. She had had enough of the pain of having someone in her heart and yearning for him day and night. She had had enough of worrying about gains and losses, and even more so, the pain of being sent to hell after being betrayed. How happy was it to be alone? Even if she turned the world upside down, in the end, it was just a life. She did not need to bear any burden of feelings. Even if she died, she would still be free and easy. So please do not pester her. She was fine being alone. The sound of flowing water entered Gong Yimo's ears. This was probably the tributary of the soaring dragon river in the capital. The water was neither wide nor narrow. She crossed the bridge and then broke it with a backhand. The moment the bridge broke and fell into the water, she felt a surge of joy in her heart. So be it. She would not be involved in all the disputes in the capital. Just as she turned around, a voice came from afar. It was filled with fear and called out to her. Royal sister. Gong Dai did not know why he had to call out to her from so far away. But when he saw her turn around, her clothes fluttering in the wind as if she was free and at ease, he panicked. If he did not call out to her, he would not have a chance. Seeing that it was Gong Dai, Gong Yimo felt afraid. After recognizing his feelings, those turbulent feelings were like a scourge to her. He was here to tie her up. He was someone who wanted to invade her life and everything about her. As she thought of this, a sword suddenly appeared in her hand and she placed it on her neck. Don't come over. Her eyes were cold as she looked at Gong Dai, as if she was looking at an enemy who wanted to bring her to eternal damnation. The blade of the sword was emitting a cold light, as if he took another step forward, she would cut her own throat in front of him. Under the moonlight, her expression was one that Gong Dai had never seen before. Therefore, he subconsciously stopped and stood on the other side of the river. The two of them faced each other, separated by a river. He was panting slightly. After running for so long, his lungs were hurting, but he still looked at her without blinking, afraid that she would leave his sight. Royal sister, don't go. Gong Yimo looked at him coldly, but her tone softened. Gong Dai, you can't protect me. Now, as long as I turn back, what awaits me is not those people snatching it away, but the Emperor's pursuit. After all, there was such a big commotion tonight. If he still couldn't find out that she was still alive, the Emperor wouldn't be the Emperor anymore. He won't. Gong Dai shouted anxiously. Imperial Father likes you so much, he won't be willing to do it. Gong Yimo smiled. Gong Dai, I know him much better than you. In the face of ambition, that little bit of affection is nothing. Go back, there's no place for me in the capital anymore. Even if it's for me. Gong Dai suddenly roared. He gasped for breath, his heart and lungs torn. He felt that his entire chest was stuffy and painful. It was as if his heart was pierced by a sword, and the pain spread to his limbs and bones. It was as painful as being torn apart by 5 horses, but even so, he was still unwilling to let go, unwilling to let go. If they want to catch you, I'll protect you. If they want to kill you, I'll protect you. The Emperor doesn't love you. I love you. He took a few steps forward and walked to the riverside, looking at her pleadingly. Just for me, can you stay? Gong Yimo bit her lower lip lightly, showing some pity. It's impossible between us. You should give up. Why is it impossible? Gong Dai was unwilling to give up. Veins appeared on his forehead, like a trapped beast that had been forced to the extreme. Is it really because of the secular world? Gong Yimo closed her eyes, and her voice became colder. It's impossible for me to have such thoughts about my little brother who I spend all my time with, because you're the most important person to me, my family. I don't want to be your family. Gong Dai's voice was torn and became hoarse. He stepped into the water and walked toward Gong Yimo. I don't want to be your family, and I don't want to be your little brother. Gong Yimo's hand exerted force, and a trace of blood flowed from her neck, piercing Gong Dai's eyes red. Don't come over. Gong Dai seemed to be fixed in the water, and he really did not dare to take another step forward. The rapid current hit his waist coldly, and his black hair moved without wind. His expression was crazy, and his whole body was filled with sorrow. He looked at Gong Yimo in a daze, and there seemed to be tears in his eyes. Gong Yimo looked at him and closed her eyes. Go back. You're the person closest to me, and I'll come back in the future. But you and I are brother and sister, and we'll be brother and sister even in death. Don't struggle. It was as if he had been sentenced to death. He was forced to the end. Gong Dai looked at Gong Yimo deeply, and a dagger appeared in his hand. His voice was low and resolute. Brother and sister in life? No. If this is fate, I'll go against it and change it. After saying that, he suddenly cut the artery on his left hand. In an instant, blood gushed out like a fountain and fell into the river, forming an endless stream of black ribbons. Gong Dai. Gong Yimo's eyes widened, and she quickly put down her sword. She took a few steps forward, but she was stopped by Gong Dai's crazy eyes. Don't come over. I'll go over. He raised his bleeding left hand and walked towards Gong Yimo step by step in the water. The closer he got, the more his heart seemed to be strangely soothed. He did not feel any pain from the stab. Instead, he smiled, and his smile was relaxed and bright. If you care about ethics, I'll let the blood in half of my body dry and cut off all ties with you, okay? Every word of this sentence was like knocking on Gong Yimo's eardrum. She was stunned on the spot, and she could not speak for a long time. The cold water made him pale and numb, and the smell of blood and the water vapor rolled over. Under the moonlight, his eyes gradually became clear and moving, as if there was light floating in them. I, Gong Dai, hereby swear. From today onwards, I'll cut off all ties with Gong Yimo, and we'll no longer be brother and sister. Gong Yimo could not help but cry. She squatted by the river and cried softly. Don't do this to me. I can't repay you. She did not know how to deal with his deep feelings and how to repay him. She felt as if she was forced into a corner by him, but because he held up the sign of his feelings, she was powerless to resist. At this moment, Gong Dai had already walked across the river. He stood in the water and was at the same height as Gong Yimo. Under the moonlight, his expression was unbelievably gentle, as if he was the messenger of salvation, gently wiping away her tears. I love you, and you don't have to repay me. Gong Yimo could not hold it in anymore, and her tears burst out. Because it was too cold, Gong Dai's wound on his left hand gradually coagulated, and it stopped bleeding. Gong Yimo suddenly took out something and put it in her mouth, and then kissed his wrist. Miraculously, with her kiss, the wound did not hurt at all. Gong Dai did not know if it was a psychological effect, or because she had just drunk something. When he looked up, Gong Yimo sucked on his lips. Chapter 169. Her initiative was something that he had only seen in his dreams. He subconsciously entangled his lips and teeth with hers, eagerly biting her. Gong Yimo passed him some strange liquid, which he unconsciously swallowed. The water is very cold, right? After Gong Yimo let go of him, Gong Dai was still panting slightly. His eyes were watery, and he looked very attractive. Why aren't you coming up? Gong Ju finally regained his senses and climbed ashore. Gong Yimo had already taken out a needle and thread, and she actually stitched up his wound needle by needle. The expected pain did not come. It was as if the needle under her hand did not pierce into his own hand. Gong Dai was shocked. He found that his body was soft and his consciousness was gradually blurring. It was extremely difficult for him to even open his mouth to speak. "What did you give me to eat?" He wanted to shake his head, but he could only sway slightly. He clearly still had a bit of consciousness, but his body was already drunk. This oral anesthetic was indeed very effective. Gong Yimo quickly stitched up his wound and applied ointment. When she was bandaging it, she said lightly to the other side of the river, How long do you want to watch the show?" It turned out that a group of people had been hiding nearby. If Gong Yimo guessed correctly, they were chasing after Gong Dai. A masked man walked out. Even though his entire body was covered, Gong Yimo still recognized him at a glance. "I was wondering who was so sneaky." "So it's you. Then it's easy to explain. If you have a mother who likes to play tricks, naturally you have a son who likes to play sneak attacks." This person was the son of Imperial concubine Long, Gong Shi. He was also the fourth prince of Dayu State. He listened to Gong Yimo's mockery and ridicule, but he was not angry. It's better to be sneaky than some people who violate the rules of the world, right? Gong Yimo picked up Gong Dai and sneered, "It's a bit difficult for you people to keep me here. What about us?" A bearded man appeared with a group of people. Gong Shi, in order to encircle her, actually did not hesitate to cooperate with Liu Ye's people. "Fourth prince, do you know that colluding with outsiders is a capital offense?" Gong Shi smiled darkly, "But he's already dead. Who would know?" Unexpectedly, his words did not scare Gong Yimo at all. Instead, she laughed out loud. "You're just a mob. You want to capture me? Give it a try." As she spoke, she ran along the river while holding Gong Ju tightly in her arms. At this moment, Gong Dai's body was only numb and his consciousness had been invaded. However, he held on with all his might and did not fall asleep. When he heard that someone had followed him to find the royal sister, he was furious. However, he couldn't move or open his mouth. He could only use his inner energy to wash his limbs over and over again. Little did he know that he had lost too much blood, and the anesthetic had numbed his nerves. The more he did this, the more dizzy he felt. If this continued, he would lose consciousness. "No, wake up. The royal sister is in danger." The pursuers crossed the lake and surrounded them from all directions. Gong Yimo, with a sword in her hand, dyed the river red with blood, but she did not even look at it. However, there were too many pursuers. Her speed was involuntarily slowed down. From time to time, warm liquid would sprinkle on Gong Dai's body. However, it would quickly cool down, all the way to his heart. This blood, was it someone else's or Gong Yimo's? He did not dare to think about it and did not dare to use his inner energy. Because of the blood loss, using inner energy would only accelerate the exhaustion of his body. He could not lose consciousness. "Wake up. The royal sister is in danger. Not good. She wants to enter the city." Gong Shi's expression finally changed. Once they entered the city, the dragons would gather and Gong Yimo would not necessarily be theirs. When the bearded man heard this, he stretched out his hand. Immediately, someone passed a golden bow to him. He drew the bow and shot an arrow. In one breath, the target was the rapidly running figure. No matter how fast you are, can you be faster than an arrow? Gong Yimo had just cut down a person when an arrow pierced through the air towards her face. She narrowly avoided it. The wind from the arrow left a bloody mark on her face. She did not seem to notice it and continued to run forward. Failing her attack and being forced into a dead end, Gong Yimo seemed to have started to go crazy. A murderous aura that made people tremble erupted from her body. The murderous aura came from afar. It actually made the bearded man, who had drawn his bow again, slightly stunned. His gaze turned serious. He was Liu Ye's great general. He was brave and good at fighting. Countless lives had been lost under his hands. However, Gong Yimo's murderous aura was impossible to have unless she had killed tens of thousands of people. However, tens of thousands of people could be piled up into a mountain. The other party was a princess who was said to have been raised in the palace since she was young. How could she have such an aura? He was still fine. The pursuers who were close to her were even more directly faced with this aura. Their legs trembled and they almost knelt down. The air seemed to have turned heavy. Their hands that were slashing towards Gong Yimo became hesitant. It was as if she was a god, a tall mountain, an existence that could not be looked at directly. They were ants. Everything that obstructed her actions were courting death. Under this momentum, Gong Yimo's momentum was like a hot knife through butter. She slaughtered almost all of the pursuers and suddenly rushed out. However, the moment she broke out of the encirclement, an arrow suddenly shot towards her. She only had time to twist her body slightly. The arrow that had pierced her heart ruthlessly pierced her shoulder. Gong Yimo turned around and looked at the bearded man, who was still in the posture of drawing his bow. At this moment, he had already drawn another arrow and aimed it coldly at her. Gong Yimo smiled. It was clearly night and far away. Nothing could be seen clearly. However, the bearded man's eyesight was astonishing. Gong Yimo's eyes seemed to contain a mountain of knives and a sea of flames. It was also like the flames of hell. When he looked at her, he felt a sharp pain in his heart. His long-distance vision seemed to have suddenly disappeared in order to protect himself. He no longer dared to look at the other party's eyes. However, he saw the other party smile strangely at him. Then, she stretched out her hand and slowly drew a line in front of her neck, making a throat-slitting action. This action made the hairs on Big Beard's back stand on end. His face turned pale. The arrow in his hand could not be aimed accurately. Even drawing the bow became laborious. However, he suddenly bit the tip of his tongue. His heart trembled. He knew that he had met his match. When he was young, he had heard from his father that there was a kind of person in this world who had suffered all kinds of hardships and experienced great ups and downs. Their wisdom far surpassed that of ordinary people. Therefore, their gazes could really affect the thoughts of ordinary people. They could really kill. Life and death in a single thought were not empty words. However, he would not give in. He was Liu Ye's most powerful warrior. He could fight with the most ferocious wolf pack. He was not afraid. No matter how fierce she was, she still had her humanity. Could she be compared to a wild beast? However, when he aimed again, he saw Gong Yimo pull out the arrow from her shoulder. Then, she turned her hand and stabbed it into the eye socket of the first pursuer. That unhesitant ruthlessness caused the bearded man's arrow to miss. It shot into the neck of another pursuer. Blood splattered. However, his hands were trembling. He could not believe that he had missed. Chapter 170. General Liu Yi, who never missed his target, actually had a moment where he missed. Was there something wrong with his eyes? No, there was nothing wrong with his eyes. It was Gong Yimo's move that was too ruthless. From pulling out the arrow to piercing the enemy's eye socket, her actions were completely subconscious. There was only death, no humanity. She was a beast. The blood on Gong Yimo's body fell on Gong Dai's face. He almost immediately knew that it was Gong Yimo's blood. This strong stimulation caused him to suddenly open his eyes. Then, he watched as she pulled out the arrow and pierced another person's eye. Because he had pulled out the arrow, the blood that gushed out once again splattered on his face and flowed into his mouth. This feeling was exactly the same as when she had hugged him in her arms and fought with the Emperor all those years ago. At that time, his mouth and nose knocked on her injured shoulder. The smell of rust flowed into his mouth and imprinted on his heart. This was his lover. Gong Dai wanted to scream and roar. The person he loved was injured. The blood seemed to have splashed into his eyes. The whole world turned blood red. Wake up! Can't you see that the person you love is suffering for you? As if feeling Gong Dai's burning gaze, Gong Yimo felt that it was inconceivable. Gong Dai looked like he was still conscious. His willpower was really strong and terrifying. Gong Yimo, who was running, did not have time to stop. She only reached out and touched his eyes. Her lungs were burning. She gasped and said a few words in a hoarse voice. "Don't look." After thinking for a while, she added another sentence. "It's too ugly." Yes, she was now in a difficult situation. Gong Ju liked her, so she didn't want him to see such an ugly side of her. Once again, he was forced to close his eyes. Gong Dai could not help but cry. A drop of tear fell into his temple, and his whole body was trembling. Men don't cry easily, but with just one look, her appearance tore his heart into pieces, and he was in so much pain that he wished he was dead. If it weren't for him, even if Gong Yimo had caused a huge mess in Dayu State, she could have concealed her identity and moved to another country to live a carefree life. And his self-righteous protection had put her in danger. He thought that his love was noble, and he was willing to give up everything for it. Little did he know that his love was selfish. It was precisely because he wanted to capture her and keep her by his side that she was in such a difficult position and in such a sorry state. However, she had never complained about him. Instead, she was vexed that she was unable to reciprocate his deep feelings. Every time he gave her something, she wanted to repay him tenfold, but she never thought about how many disasters he had brought to her. This was his lover. He wanted to hold on to her tightly, but he kept hurting her and making things difficult for her. She was someone he loved to the bone. No wonder she wasn't moved. It was because he hadn't done enough, far from enough. He wasn't worthy of her. Seeing that the imperial city was right in front of him, Gong sure couldn't hold back anymore. He wanted to keep her at all costs. However, the bearded man waved his hand and left with the rest of his men with an inexplicable expression. Originally, he had agreed to encircle and annihilate Gong Yimo because he wanted to take the opportunity to kill Gong Dai. However, the figure that protected Gong Dai with her life, the figure that made his heart tremble in fear, was worthy of his respect. Therefore, he didn't continue to pester her. He looked forward to the day when they would meet on the battlefield. However, even though there was one less party, there were still many pursuers. Many pursuers. Gong Yimo felt that her hand that was wielding the sword had become heavy, but she couldn't fall. She couldn't die in a place like this, or be captured by others and experience the torment of hell again. At this time, the sound of horse hooves could be heard from afar. Gong Yimo narrowed her eyes and looked up. Gong Shi and the rest gradually panicked. At this time, no matter who it would be bad news to him. His gloomy eyes landed on Gong Yimo unwillingly. She was so close. Just a little bit more. The battle was still ongoing. Seeing that he couldn't take down Gong Yimo today, he was extremely unwilling. However, without external help and suffering heavy losses, he could only accept this great loss. Before the cavalry arrived, he gritted his teeth and led his men to withdraw. A fast horse broke away from the group and galloped over. That person's face was like jade. Even in the night, it was like a pearl, bright and dazzling. Gong Yimo. Shun Shi Ye's voice seemed to have drained all of Gong Yimo's strength. She knelt on one knee and hugged Gong Dai tightly with both hands. Shun Shi ordered everyone to chase after her, but he knelt on one knee in front of Gong Yimo. He wanted to reach out and brush away the sweat and blood on her forehead, but he didn't dare. He was afraid that he would break her. "You? How are you?" Just as he was panicking and hesitating, Gong Yimo slowly and solemnly handed the person in her arms to him. Shun Shi saw that it was Gong Dai and was even more shocked. "Help me take care of him." Her voice was so soft that it was almost inaudible. "What about you?" Gong Yimo smiled slightly. There was only one possibility for Shun Shi to appear here. That is, the emperor was convinced that she was still alive and sent Shun Shi to catch her. So now, she couldn't turn back. Sure enough, after saying this, Shun Shi shut his mouth in annoyance and looked at her worriedly. Gong Yimo fed herself a rejuvenation pill and felt her dried-up dantian heat up. Only then did she feel a little better. "Now, there is no place for me in the capital. I will just leave." After saying this, she pursed her dry lips and looked at Gong Dai, who seemed to be asleep. She let out a sigh of relief and smiled. I will entrust him to you." Shun Shi Ye's lips moved. He was under the emperor's orders, but he couldn't say anything, even if he wanted her to stay and recuperate. Gong Yimo looked at Gong Dai again. After thinking for a bit, she lowered her head and whispered in his ear in a voice that only the two of them could hear. "You said you love me. Then when we meet again, show me your strength." She didn't give any promises or words of encouragement. She just used her usual provocative style to say this sentence. But this sentence undoubtedly recognized him and meant that she was giving him a chance. If Gong Dai was awake, he would definitely be very happy. After saying this, she looked deeply at Gong Dai and then got up to leave. Shin Shiyi couldn't help but ask in a panic, "Where will you go?" Gong Yimo didn't answer, but that proud and upright figure, in a sorry state, revealed a sense of heroism. The world was big. Where couldn't she go? She was a natural eagle, not a canary raised in the backyard. That figure gradually swallowed up by the night made Shin Shiyi smile helplessly. It was because of this that he liked her. This was great. He came under the Emperor's orders to capture people, but he just let them go. He didn't know how to suppress this matter. Thinking about this, he resigned himself to his fate and carried Gong Dai into the city. Gong Dai was unbelievably quiet. Shin Shiyi couldn't help but think that if he was awake, he definitely wouldn't let her go so easily. But he didn't know what kind of transformation Gong Dai had experienced this night. His face was like a perfect sculpture under the moonlight, but there seemed to be something new between his eyebrows, as if it had been sublimated. Chapter 171. It was like a dream. In the dream, she was wearing a light green gauze dress and was still sitting on the rocking chair. The shade of the tree was still modeled on her body, and the sound of cicadas and birds was in her ears. If that person is a burden to you, if that person makes you suffer, why don't you let go? She tilted her head slightly, as if she couldn't understand. Gong Dai reached out to touch her, but it was like touching the moon in the water. He couldn't touch her, but her curious eyes stared at him without blinking, waiting for his answer. Because she makes me happier. Gong Dai suddenly opened his eyes. In front of him was a familiar curtain. He was in Qi Manor. He had returned. "Your Highness." Lo Qi was very surprised to see Gong Dai awake. "Your Highness, do you feel uncomfortable anywhere?" When Gong Dai was sent back by Shin Shiyi, Lo Qi was really frightened. He clearly looked like he was asleep, but he couldn't wake him up. He was completely unaware of the outside world. Now that he was awake, it was good. Gong Dai looked at him blankly, then closed his eyes again. He heard Gong Yimo's last sentence clearly and vaguely, like a dream. "You said you love me. Then when we meet again, show me your strength." She seemed to be smiling, and her tone was as happy as if her prank had succeeded. She still left, but he didn't know why. Although he was disappointed, he felt more satisfied. After the repeated provocations last night, her frozen heart seemed to have been cracked by him. Although it was only a small crack, he believed that other than him, no one else could cause that crack to flare up. If they meet again, then so be it. He believed that if they met again, she would definitely be subdued by him. "Your Highness?" Lo Qi worriedly called out again. Gong Dai's eyes were still closed, but he asked, "Yesterday, did you catch Nan of Gojoseon?" Lo Qi quickly said, "We caught him. Fortunately, we reacted in time. He almost sneaked out of the city." At this moment, Gong Dai slowly got up and opened his eyes. Her ink-black hair slid down to her chest. When she opened her eyes again, there seemed to be a flicker of light in her cold eyes. There was a kind of dangerous and frightening beauty. She still looked the same, but Lo Qi felt that her highness was different. It was as if something had broken through and changed qualitatively, becoming more mature and tenacious. "Bring Nan of Gojoseon with you. Let's enter the palace." Lo Qi was stunned for a moment. When he came back to his senses, he disagreed and said worriedly, "Your Highness, you haven't recovered yet. Why are you in such a hurry to enter the palace?" Gong Dai smiled faintly. His eyes were cold. "Of course, I have to rush before everyone else and go to Imperial Father to beg for forgiveness. After yesterday, the Emperor must have been estranged from him, but it didn't matter. He could feel that the Emperor still cherished his royal sister. Therefore, he had to seize the opportunity and use this pity to make the Emperor let go of his royal sister for the time being. After all, she was now seriously injured and could no longer endure the torment of those wolves and leopards in the capital. Moreover, he wanted power. What he wanted was not only the power to protect Gong Yimo, but also the power to turn around and attack others. The power to make everyone fear him. Thinking of this, He clenched his fists and was determined to win. When they met again, he wanted to give her the most reassuring thing. He wanted everyone to submit to him and not be trampled on by his royal sister. When Gong Yimo opened her eyes, she was shocked to find herself in the carriage. She couldn't hold on and fainted. She felt that her body was carefully bandaged. Was she saved by someone? "Hey, you're finally awake." A familiar voice sounded. When Gong Yimo opened her eyes, she was dazzled by the other party's face, which was more beautiful and exquisite than a woman's. His eyes moved and the carriage lit up. He sighed faintly. "If you don't wake up, what about the deal from before? I can't let my shiny silver go to waste." Gong Yimo's mouth twitched. "Don't worry. As long as I'm still alive, the money, little cough, won't be forgotten." Kim Yoon smiled faintly and deliberately looked at her with a disdainful expression. "It's not good to boast. What I see is just a penniless and homeless little girl. Tell me, where did the money come from?" Gong Yimo was speechless. Indeed, not only did she not have a place to stay in Dayu State, but the money in her hands was also in Gong Dai's hands. In order to prevent Gong Dai from finding her, she would definitely not use these resources. So she was really poor and had nothing. She rolled her eyes and whimpered as she lay on her back. "Indeed, riches and honor are like fleeting clouds to me. It's gone again." Her exaggerated appearance made Kim Yoon laugh. As a grown man, he could be said to be in his most perfect state. His handsome face comforted Gong Yimo. Fortunately, although she was poor, there was still a handsome man to look at. It was not a loss at all. She rubbed her stomach and felt a little hungry. When she saw the food and wine on the short table beside her, she quickly got up and wolfed it down. When she saw Kim Yoon looking at her with some disdain, she laughed mischievously. "Tell me, how did you find me? How long have I been unconscious?" Kim Yoon would not tell her that he was hiding among the people who came to visit Yuheng. He did not want to expose himself, but when he heard someone say that Gong Yimo was still alive at the relay station, he could not sit still and ran out with people. However, he did not know the direction and could only use the most foolish method to search around the capital. He was lucky. When many people thought that Gong Yimo had fallen into the hands of Shan Shiyi, the emperor, he found her in a haystack. So he said casually, "I just wanted to go back to my country. Who knew that I would meet you? So I picked you up and brought you along. As for how long I was unconscious, it should be 4 or 5 days." Gong Yimo rubbed her stomach when she heard this. No wonder she was so hungry. "Wait, you're talking about going back to your country?" Kim Yoon glanced at her, his eyes moving with charm. "What else? There is no place for you in Dayu State. You, come with me to Yuheng to play." Gong Yimo was shocked, but after thinking about it, she realized that he was right. This lousy place made her feel confused. She could not stay here. So she angrily took a bite of the pastry and said incoherently, "Okay, let's go to Yuheng." Kim Yoon smiled proudly. Yuheng, an oval-shaped country sandwiched between Luyi and Dayu State. It was the smallest of the 4 major countries, and its people were very harmonious. It had the valiance of the nomads and the elegance of the Han people in the south. It was very special. However, Yuheng's royal family blindly worshipped the prosperity of Dayu State. They had only learned the extravagant side and were already showing signs of decline. The carriage entered Yuheng smoothly. When they saw that it was Kim Yoon's carriage, many people cheered. "The second prince is back?" The people passed the news to each other. Many young girls even threw silk handkerchiefs in their hands onto the carriage. Gong Yimo clicked her tongue when she saw this. "I didn't expect you to be so popular in the country." Chapter 172. Gong Yimo's casual words made Kim Yoon frown slightly. He sighed and said to the coachman, "Go straight to the palace." "Yes." Thus, the group did not stop and went straight to the Yuheng Imperial Palace. Unexpectedly, they were stopped at the entrance of the palace. The guard at the entrance casually bowed, but his eyes were staring at the curtain of the carriage, as if he wanted to take a look at the beauty. "Your Highness, they have to search before they are willing to let her go." The coachman opened the curtain and said with some difficulty. Gong Yimo was stunned. Wasn't Kim Yoon a prince? Why did they have to search? There were so many people coming and going. If they really searched the prince's carriage in front of everyone, Kim Yoon would be so shameless. Sure enough, Kim Yoon's expression was also very ugly. He took out a banknote and handed it to the coachman. And in the cold palace, a terrible scene was playing out. The originally clean and warm room was now in a mess. A woman's screams and cries could be heard, accompanied by a man's angry curses. Slut. After staying in the cold palace for so long, don't you want a man? Jin will satisfy you. A middle-aged man pressed a weak woman on the bed, and a group of people were guarding outside the door. No matter how the woman resisted, it was useless. Yoon Jin was pressed firmly on the bed. She cried like a pear blossom, but other than crying, she could do nothing. If she really resisted too much, it was very likely to implicate Yoon. Forget it, she was already a withered flower. So what was the harm in that? Seeing Yoon Jin gradually stop moving and only cry, Emperor Jin Shang of the Yuheng Empire, who was tearing her clothes, raised his head, suddenly grabbed her chin, and said fiercely, "What are you crying for? You are Zhen's woman. Zhen dotes on you, and you are not happy? Smile for Zhen. Zhen wants you to smile." Yoon Jin was so scared that her face turned pale. She did not dare to cry again, but she could never smile. Jin Shang's slightly swollen eyes glanced coldly at the door. "You don't want to laugh, right? That little bastard should be back today. If you don't smile, we will make him cry for you to see." As he spoke, he chuckled. "Don't say. That little beast is getting more and more beautiful. I wonder what it's like to play with it." You. Yoon Jin was so angry that she trembled when she saw his lewd eyes. "He's your son." "Bah," Jin Shang said fiercely. "He has a dirty mother. Who knows whose son he is?" With that said, he couldn't be bothered to argue with her and scoffed. "Zhen is asking you, are you going to laugh or not?" Yoon Jin was shocked by the fierceness in his eyes, and tears fell from her temples again. I'll laugh. With that said, she revealed a very miserable smile. But a beauty was a beauty. No matter how stiff her expression was, she still had the delicate beauty of a weeping pear blossom. Her meekness made Jin Shang very satisfied. Soon, the woman's painful whimpers sounded. She moaned softly, as if she was in so much pain that she was in despair. Kim Yoon waited anxiously outside Jintang Palace. At this time, a person who looked like a eunuch walked out and arrogantly snorted, "Your Highness, please return. His Majesty is not willing to see you." Jin Yun's face stiffened, and he hurriedly stuffed several banknotes into the eunuch's hands. The eunuch's face immediately changed when he secretly glanced at the face value. He quickly put away the banknotes and pretended to sigh. "Your Highness, please return. It's not that His Majesty is not willing to see you, but that His Majesty is not here." With that, he turned and left. This simple sentence received 1,000 taels from Kim Yoon. Gong Yimo lowered her head and was slightly speechless. What a nouveau riche. "Oh no!" Kim Yoon suddenly exclaimed and ran away. Gong Yimo hurriedly followed. She had changed into men's clothing and was sitting beside him like a waiter. "What's wrong?" Gong Yimo was a little puzzled and asked as she ran. She saw that in just a short while, Kim Yoon's forehead was covered in a layer of cold sweat. The muscles on his face twitched, and his expression was unprecedentedly cold. Imperial Father is not in the main palace. It's very likely. He tightly shut his mouth. It was very likely that he had gone to the cold palace. Along the way, there were constantly people casting faint, disdainful glances at Kim Yoon. No one even came up to greet him. How could Kim Yoon have the mood to care about these things? He ran all the way. When he arrived at the cold palace, it was already surrounded by the Imperial guards. Imperial Father really came to find Imperial Mother. "Your Second Highness, His Majesty has decreed that no one is allowed to enter." The guard looked greedily and disdainfully at Kim Yoon's face. There was no trace of respect in his words, only mockery. Kim Yoon panicked. He touched his body and was about to give him some banknotes as a bribe when he heard a woman scream. He immediately froze. It was Imperial Mother. It was Imperial Mother's voice. Before he could say anything, a person wearing a dragon robe with disheveled clothes strode out. His body was stained with blood. and his face was so gloomy that it was dripping water. Bad luck? What bad luck? The moment he stepped out, Kim Yoon stared at him for a long time. It was only when Gong Yimo secretly tugged at his sleeve that he fell to his knees and said in a low voice, "Greetings to Imperial Father." When Jian Shang saw that it was Kim Yoon, his expression became even worse. He snorted coldly. "That bitch of a mother of yours wants to die. Go collect her corpse." As he spoke, he led the others to walk away. His words frightened Kim Yoon. Before the emperor had gone far, he staggered in. Imperial Mother. When Kim Yoon entered the courtyard, he saw that the door was wide open and it was a mess. When he entered, he saw that there was a bloody mark on Yoon Jin's shoulder. This made his soul fly out of his body and his face turned pale. Yoon Jin cried softly. She originally wanted to endure, but at the last moment, she was overcome with grief and wanted to die. However, Yuheng Emperor quickly blocked her. Her last stab stabbed into the shoulder and not the neck. She had a weak personality. Although she was in the cold palace, because Kim Yoon spared no effort to take care of her, she was not affected by the conspiracies of the harem. As a result, even though she was in her 30s, she was still as innocent as 18. Her face seemed to be as young as her heart. Even though she did not take care of it, she was still as beautiful as a woman in her 20s. When Gong Yimo saw that the room was in chaos, she blocked the door and let the others guard the courtyard entrance. She walked in. Her mother seemed to be injured. She might be able to help. After entering, she saw that on the messy bed, a beautiful woman was leaning on Kim Yoon's arm and crying bitterly. Her shoulder was still bleeding, and Kim Yoon was kneeling by the bed. His eyes were red, but he did not know what to do. Gong Yimo walked over and sighed softly. "Your Highness, I have medicine in my hand. Your Highness, please wait outside for a moment. I will bandage Her Highness." When Kim Yoon heard this, he looked at her blankly. However, when he saw the determination in her eyes, he seemed to wake up and nodded repeatedly. When he got up, he looked at his mother who was lying on the bed in so much pain that she wanted to die. His Adam's apple moved, and he said softly, "Imperial Mother has a weak personality. I am afraid that she will take things too hard. Please." Gong Yimo nodded. Chapter 173. Kim Yoon sighed and left. Gong Yimo waited for a while. When her hand touched Madame Yoon Jin, the latter had stopped crying. She stared at the dagger on the ground as if she was in a daze. She allowed Yoon Jin to manipulate the dagger without taking her eyes off it. Gong Yimo sighed and said as she used the Yurong powder in her space to apply medicine to her. "Your Highness probably hasn't seen me before." When Gong Yimo spoke, she saw that the other party didn't say a word. She continued, "I was picked up by His Highness on the way back to the country. His Highness is really a kind person." When she mentioned Kim Yoon, a trace of sadness flashed across Yoon Jin's eyes, but the will to die did not disappear. She was a mentally weak person who liked to dwell on insignificant problems. After being treated like that by the Emperor today, she had no other thoughts other than death. Gong Yimo saw the bruises on her body, but she didn't care. She continued, "His Highness is good at everything, but he's too shrewd. On the way, I saw him bringing the goods he bought in Dayu State to Yuheng to sell. He didn't forget to do this kind of profiteering when he went to offer birthday wishes. I saw that many people didn't understand His Highness's self-degrading actions, and I didn't understand it either." When she saw that Yoon Jin was listening, she continued, "Although he got a lot of money, he also lost the dignity of a prince. I asked him if money was important. He said that money was the most adorable thing in the world. It's really too embarrassing. His Highness seems to have a lot of businesses and earns a lot of money every day. But such a rich person is so stingy. I saw that he only changed a few pieces of clothing. He really doesn't look like a prince. I'm almost wondering if I followed the wrong person." When Yoon Jin heard this, she glanced at her. She saw that she was pouting, as if she was annoyed that she didn't see the right person. Was this her son's waiter? Was she telling the truth? Yoon had never told her about it. "But when I returned to the capital today, I realized that I was wrong. Your Highness is really generous." Gong Yimo narrowed her eyes and said, "When we entered the palace, The guards made things difficult for us both openly and secretly. He gave us 500 taels at once. Just now in the Golden Hall, for a slightly more accurate piece of information, he gave us another 1,000 taels. No wonder he's usually so stingy. At this point, Gong Yimo tilted her head slightly and looked at her, as if she didn't understand. It's just that I'm a little curious. Your Highness, can you please tell me? Why is it that Kim Yoon is clearly a prince, but even the eunuch at the gate can make things difficult for him as he pleases? Why do you think? Her words caused Yoonjin to be shocked and angry. Tears once again gushed out of her eyes. So Yoon had been living such a hard life? She was useless as a mother and had dragged Yoon down. Gong Yimo's fingers quickly tied a bow on her shoulder, admiring it for a moment. Your Highness, you also think that His Second Highness has a hard life, right? She laughed mischievously, but changed the topic. But he's working so hard because he wants you to have a better life. He once told me that in the Cold Palace, he has to bribe more than 1,000 taels of silver every month. I see that although your house is simple, it has everything you need. It can be seen that he's working so hard to earn money for you. Now that he's 20 years old and has a handsome appearance, no one wants to marry him. Don't say any more. Yoonjin let out a low whimper. Her beautiful eyes looked at Gong Yimo pleadingly, begging her not to say any more. It was as if she didn't say anything, these things wouldn't exist. But look, what have you done? His future is bleak, and he can't move forward. And you're still causing trouble for him. Gong Yimo stood up and walked around the room. Just now, when the Emperor wanted to touch you, you made such a big fuss and even wanted to die. Is it because there's someone in your heart? Gong Yimo's words scared Yoonjin so much that she forgot to cry. She did have someone she loved. That person was a musician in the palace, but after the Emperor took her away, that person disappeared without a trace. Because of that person, even though she was forcefully taken by the Emperor, she was always in pain. Later, she was framed for having an affair and was banished to the Cold Palace. But she didn't expect that even after being banished to the Cold Palace, the nightmare didn't end. The Emperor still came to find her. Gong Yimo couldn't help but sneer. Kim Yoon, he's the Emperor's biological son, right? How could such a disgraceful thing be faked? Yoonjin was also angered and said firmly, Yoon is naturally His Majesty's biological son. Gong Yimo clicked her tongue and suddenly approached her, looking down at her. Then I don't understand. Sleeping with him once is sleeping. Sleeping with him twice is sleeping. You've already given birth to a child. Instead of thinking about the well-being of the child, you've repeatedly implicated your own biological son for a man who probably doesn't even like you. Are you Kim Yoon's biological mother? Her words made Yoonjin's face turn pale. What did she know? How scary was this harem? Those women looked at her as if they wanted to swallow her alive. She didn't like the palace, and she didn't like the Emperor. She wanted to leave so badly. That person said that he would come back to save her. She didn't do anything wrong by staying chaste. Gong Yimo crossed her arms and looked at her faintly. There's a saying that is true. Women, once they've been found to have done something wrong, they'll go all the way. You're quite stubborn. Once you've been wrong for more than 10 years. Gong Yimo knew that this kind of person couldn't be coaxed. The more you coaxed, the more pretentious she would be. On the other hand, if you mocked and ridiculed her, she would be more receptive. Madame Yoonjin looked at her in a daze. No one had ever said such words to her. The Emperor doted on her, and then he abused her. Her sweetheart was obedient to her. Even her son was very sensible and coaxed her in everything. She was still thinking about it when she saw the other party lift her clothes and squat down to look at her. The aura she revealed made Yoonjin, this little woman, involuntarily shrink back. She suddenly became alert. Who was this waiter dressed like? Why was he so special that he would say such words to her and make her feel afraid? Come, woman who's blinded by love. You haven't told me yet. Are you Kim Yoon's biological mother? Yoonjin lightly bit her lips like a frightened rabbit. After a while, she said, Of course I am. Then tell me again. You've been in the Cold Palace for so many years. Other than your son being filial to you, enduring being scolded and trampled by others, and persisting in taking care of you and doing his best to make your life more comfortable, Has that great hero in your heart ever come to find you? Thinking of that tall and sturdy man and Gong Yimo's words, her pale lips trembled. For a while, she couldn't say anything. He didn't come. He didn't come even once. Perhaps he was already dead, and she wouldn't be able to leave the palace for the rest of her life. Thinking of this, Yun-jin grieved and tears fell again. Chapter 174. Gong Yimo rolled her eyes. Can you stop crying? Do you know how much of a burden you've brought to your son? And you're still crying. If it weren't for you, he could have been carefree and happy with his wives and concubines. He might even have had a chance to fight for that position. But because of you, he's been looked down upon and humiliated. And you've been hiding in the cold palace, not thinking or looking at anything. When you see that he's injured, you cry and cry. I'm afraid that he'll have to turn around and comfort you. Let me ask you, have you never thought deeply about it and not felt ashamed? What's in your head? She was straightforward and harsh. Yun-jin couldn't take it anymore. Yes, she was useless except for being a burden. Now that her last bit of hope had been ruthlessly trampled on by Gong Yimo, she suddenly wailed and threw herself to the ground, trying to snatch the dagger on the ground. Gong Yimo watched her fall to the ground and didn't care. Instead, she quickly ran to lock the door. Hearing such a loud noise, Kim Yun quickly knocked on the door. However, Gong Yimo ignored Kim Yun's urgent questioning and blocked the door. She coldly watched as Yun-jin placed the dagger on her neck. She looked calm and unruffled, as if waiting for her to stab her. Stab her? What are you waiting for? Gong Yimo stood in front of the door and looked at the woman on the ground. At this moment, her beautiful eyes were wide open. The tip of the dagger that was almost at her neck was trembling, but she couldn't stab her. Gong Yimo smiled. Such a weak person. She was afraid of everything. Yet she still blamed the heavens and blamed others. Are you waiting for him to come in and save you? Don't think about it. I'll watch the door for you. If you want to die, then die. Kim Yun couldn't hear what was said inside. He kept knocking on the door, but no one responded. Yun-jin gritted her teeth several times. She resented Gong Yimo's cold-bloodedness. Forget it. Since no one in this world could tolerate her, she might as well die. As she thought about it, she suddenly swung her hand down, but Gong Yimo caught her hand at the last moment. She exerted her strength, but her strength was not enough. The dagger did not move an inch. Gong Yimo pinched her fingers. She cried out in pain and the dagger fell to the ground. How dare you? At this moment, her hair was in a mess, and she felt as if she had been raped. She burst into tears. Who are you? What right do you have to control me? Don't you want me to die? I'll die for you to see. Gong Yimo was not as aggressive as before. She reached out and touched Yun-jin's hair. Perhaps it was because her actions were too strange and gave off a strong feeling. Yun-jin cried a few times. Later, she did not dare to cry anymore, because she knew that Gong Yimo would not coax her. Gong Yimo touched her hair and chuckled. You're not even afraid of death, but you're still afraid of being touched by the emperor? Her words made Yun-jin's face turn white and red. She seemed to want to refute, but she did not know how to. You're not even afraid of death, but you're afraid of the women in the harem? If you're not even afraid of death, why don't you curry favor with the emperor and make it up to your son? If you're not even afraid of death, why can't you be more strong-willed and leave the cold palace to find that man? You're waiting for someone to save you. Why can't you consider the possibility of saving yourself? Gong Yimo patted her face and sighed with a smile. I think your heart is higher than the sky, but your life is thinner than paper. The emperor still came to find you in the cold palace. It can be seen that glory, splendor, and wealth are at your fingertips. But it's fine if you pretend to refuse, but you still want to implicate your son again. Listen to how anxious he is outside. Gong Yimo grabbed her shoulder to calm her down and listen. Kim Yun was already banging on the door. He was so anxious, as if he was afraid that Gong Yimo would harm her. This made Yun-jin feel ashamed for the first time. Gong Yimo picked up the dagger again and stuffed it into her hand. Tisk, I'll return it to you. Whether you want to commit suicide or kill someone else, I don't care. With that, she clapped her hands and got up to open the door. After opening the door, Kim Yun rushed in. He did not even look at Gong Yimo, but directly pounced on Madame Yunjin on the ground. Mother, mother, what's wrong with you? As if she was still dreaming, she was suddenly pulled into reality. Yunjin grabbed Kim Yoon's hand and looked at Gong Yimo fearfully. She hid behind him and asked timidly, Yoon, are you having a hard time outside? Kim Yoon felt a little strange. He quickly said, It's not hard, it's not hard. She hadn't said anything yet, but her son had said that it wasn't hard. It was obvious that he was really lying to her. Yunjin burst into tears again. How stupid and naive was she? She had stayed in the cold palace for more than 10 years and was immersed in those ridiculous thoughts. Had she neglected the most important person? Today, if this person did not wake her up, she did not know how long she would be in a daze. Seeing her cry, Kim Yoon was already used to it and quickly comforted her. Yunjin glanced at Gong Yimo, stood up by herself, and walked towards her. My lord, she bowed and said with tears in her eyes, This servant's life has been ruined. I have no more hope. I only hope that my lord can help my son. This servant was wrong before, but it's too late to regret. Please help him, my lord. She originally thought that she would say those words to her and deliberately stimulate her and wake her up. She would definitely help her son, who knew that Gong Yimo would grin. If you want to help him yourself. She still did not move. Gong Yimo said those words just to let her do it herself. Unfortunately, some people were used to being weak and could not stand up with just a few words. She was not a savior, nor was he her son. She did not want to burden herself. Seeing Gong Yimo leave just like that, Yunjin did not come back to her senses for a long time. She did not understand. She had clearly admitted that she was wrong, but why did that my lord still look dissatisfied? She did not know that a person with a weak personality like her would subconsciously rely on others even if she was reminded. It would be strange if Gong Yimo was satisfied with this. However, Yunjin seemed to admire Gong Yimo very much. She thought that the other party must be a very capable strategist. She must not make the other party leave because of her weak personality. Thus, she wiped her tears and repeatedly urged Kim Yoon to look for her. Kim Yoon sighed and said, Mother, she's my friend. It's all right. Yunjin was slightly relieved. Then, she recalled what Gong Yimo said before and was stunned. She had probably never suffered such a big blow. Kim Yoon was a little uneasy. Mother, what exactly did she say to you? At the mention of this, Yunjin wanted to cry again. However, in any case, she had been shocked by Gong Yimo once. She was traumatized and stopped crying after a few cries. She only said that she was a good person and wanted Kim Yoon to treat her well. Meanwhile, in the Golden Hall Palace, Jin Shang chased all the women out and smashed all the famous porcelain in sight. The evil fire in her heart could not be suppressed. That woman, who exactly was she protecting her body for? Chapter 175. His anger alarmed an Scylla, who was reviewing memorials in the side hall. That's right, the emperor's memorials were all reviewed by others. However, he was very cunning. He didn't call one person, but 3 people to take turns reviewing the memorials. An Scylla was one of his younger brothers, and he looked very gentle. Why is your majesty so angry? Jin Shang glanced at him and gritted his teeth. Isn't it because of that bitch in the cold palace? An Scylla smiled. If you ask me, since imperial brother can't forget her, you should let her out. How can that be? Jin Shang suddenly raised his voice and looked at him gloomily. That bitch. Let her out to cause chaos in the palace? An Scylla looked at his resolute attitude and smiled faintly. Your Majesty, you don't have to be so angry. Don't you value her because you think she's beautiful? That bastard son of hers isn't bad either. His words made the emperor, who didn't care about sex, hesitate. Although he was muddle-headed and lecherous and had a few male concubines in his harem, he still had some rationality. Although it was uncertain whether Kim Yoon was his son, he was still a little hesitant to do such a thing. An Scylla said, The second prince is very popular among the people now. The people don't know the truth and have been deceived by him. Is your majesty going to be merciful? If he continues to grow, the eldest prince won't be able to suppress him when he inherits the throne. He dares. Jin Shang was a little angry. He's just the son of a songstress. Does he want to overturn the heavens? And of Scylla's eyes shone faintly. Who said that? The human heart is always greedy. By the time Jin Yun came out, it was already evening. Gong Yimou was lying alone on the wall of the cold palace, her hands behind her head as she looked at the sunset. She had a piece of withered grass in her mouth, and there was an indescribable sense of loneliness. There was not much difference between Yuheng and Dayu State. The sky was the same, and people looked the same. Why did she have a faint feeling of homesickness? It must be an illusion. Jin Yun walked over and stood at the foot of the wall. He sighed and said, "Princess, my mother's nature is like this. If there's anything you don't like, please forgive her." Gong Yimou spat out the grass in her mouth. She tilted her head and said calmly, "You, a person who was implicated, didn't say anything. How can an outsider like me have any opinions?" He smiled faintly. Every move he made was shockingly beautiful. "What are you talking about? She is my mother, the most important person in my life." Gong Yimou could not understand his filial piety. She only asked, "Why do I feel like they don't like you? Aren't you the emperor's son?" At the mention of this, Jin Yun's lips curled into a bitter smile. "When I was born, my father was especially happy. Because my mother was favored, my status also rose. But later, someone framed my mother for an affair. After a thorough investigation, that man took poison and died. My father also became suspicious of my mother. Later, rumors spread everywhere in the harem. The concubines asked me to do a blood test. It was strange. I was clearly my father's son, but the blood just couldn't fuse together." He smiled bitterly. In a few words, he summarized those turbulent and dark years. "But at that time, Imperial grandfather stood up. He believed that I was the son of the imperial family. He even said that when he was young, he had heard that even the blood of blood couldn't fuse together. So, he protected me. But since then, my father was deeply suspicious of my mother. He often beat and scolded her. Plus, my mother, she didn't have any feelings for my father. So, after they parted on bad terms, she moved to the cold palace. As for me, I was raised under the name of the late empress." Gong Yimou nodded. "I didn't expect your background to be so complicated. Not only did he have a muddle-headed singer mother, but he also had an even more muddle-headed father. Your grandfather was right. This kind of situation did happen. And looking at your mother, she wasn't someone who would cheat. Even if she had the heart, she definitely didn't have the guts." Her words made Kim Yun's face look embarrassed. He came forward and used his strength to climb up the wall and sit beside her. In the end, he practiced dancing all year round, so his skills were quite good. He smiled. "You don't have to sympathize with me. I was lucky. The late empress didn't have a son, so she took good care of me. My mother also had a better life. It's a pity that she died early, and some people took advantage of her. That some people he was talking about was probably the current empress." Gong Yimou looked at his overly dazzling face and said, "Your dance was also taught by your mother?" He nodded a little bashfully. "After she died, my situation became difficult. The other brothers ostracized me and scolded me, so I could only hide in the cold palace. As for my mother, she had a naive temperament and her knowledge was limited. When I was young, I was always weak and sickly. My mother said that she had practiced dancing since she was young, and she never even caught a cold. So every time she practiced dancing in the courtyard, she would bring me along. Slowly, I actually learned how to dance." Speaking of this, he faintly smiled. He was a little self-deprecating, but at the same time, he felt very satisfied. Perhaps when he was young, hiding in the cold palace to practice dancing, it was one of the few times in his life that he felt happy. Then, why did you become a singer? This was what Gong Yimou couldn't understand the most. She couldn't see the slightest bit of the noble pride of a prince on Kim Yun. He was like a beautiful wildgrass. Not only could he put down his status to earn money, he could even abandon his male identity to become the most inferior singer. This was simply inconceivable in ancient times. When Kim Yun heard this, he became even more embarrassed. There was a faint blush on his face, which made the clouds in the sky pale in comparison. He sighed softly, as if he didn't care. but also as if he cared. Because I was really short of money. My father didn't care about me and left me to fend for myself. My brothers ostracized me, and the palace people looked down on me. Only money could allow me to survive and live a better life. As a singer, not only could I earn money, my mother could also live a more comfortable life in the cold palace. I could also spare the energy to help the poor common people. I could also inquire about news and know about the world's movements. After a long time, I didn't care. Even if you abandoned your male identity, you didn't care? Gong Yimo's words stung him, causing his expression to stiffen for a moment. After a long time, he slowly exhaled. I didn't care. He turned his head and stared at Gong Yimo. Those beautiful eyes seemed to be filled with stars. In this world, other than death, everything is trivial. Then, he raised his head and looked at the sky. There was a trace of unyielding will and yearning in his expression. And living, isn't there only one goal? That is to do everything possible to live well, and to continue living. Looking at the side of his face that was slightly raised, this was a person. He was clearly suffering, but he still maintained hope and enthusiasm. He was clearly tired, but he could still take care of his mother and take care of the poor common people. Gong Yimo suddenly felt that this was what it meant to be born from the heart. He deserved the title of the #1 beauty in the world. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.